Not no, just not having good person shooting. That's what I did.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the probation officers and 911 telecommunicators pension plan work group to order. And with that, welcome everyone to our marathon meeting. Just by way of housekeeping, I know there are some people that need to leave around 3 and then others who need to leave shortly after that. And so the meeting likely will become a little less formal after we lose some folks, just because we don't want to be making decisions without the right people in the room. But certainly the room is available until 4 o'clock. And so if folks want to use the room, have to snack, and stay here until 4, that is absolutely fine. And I can be available up until that time as well. I understand if you need to leave. Yeah, okay. So we'll get right after it here. And I know there are a couple of documents. Did staff want to just walk through the documents that came in since the first agenda went out so everyone knows what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so since the first agenda went out, you got a document under agenda item number 1, which is a presentation on the MSRS deferred compensation plan. And then the other documents are under agenda item number 4, the MSRS new plan features and definitions, the probation officer memo on plan features, and an estimated cost for the MSRS subplan. And then under agenda item number 5, we also included that same probation officer memo. So that's the same memo that's under number 4. It applies to both the para and the MSRS plan. We put it under both. So those are the documents that are different than what was sent out on the agenda last week.
Very good. So we'll plan to walk through those new documents when we get to them. Anyone have any questions before we get going? Very good. Well, then we'll jump right into agenda item number 1, the Minnesota Deferred Compensation Plan option to consider in lieu of new pension plan. And I do have one thing. Yeah, I think we should introduce Mike. Oh, I apologize. Hello.
Hello, Mike Ledoux. Pleasure of taking Jim Morton's spot. You hired me that we had last. Prior to that, I was a Minnesota State Trooper. I retired in August. I had been vice president of the Troopers Association for about a decade. And I was also had the pleasure of being elected representative on the MSRS state control plan.
And I want to just note that you're very steeped in the issues that we're talking about in terms of other work you've done. So thank you for joining and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Well, then I'll turn it over to Erin Leonard.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I was asked to just provide a quick overview of the Minnesota Deferred Compensation Plan. This is a presentation that I compiled a few different presentations together. So it's not our formal introduction. So I customized it for this group. So I wanted to just remind you about estimated replacement ratio for income. Kind of how do we might be able to fund that gap or what that income gap is. Go through the deferred compensation plan, and then I did some specific calculations on different percentages that would be contributed to the plan and what the impact would be at the end, what potential balance you could have at the end. So as we mentioned, you may need 80% of your income post-retirement. And so how do you make that up to that 80%? So I looked at our averages, and the average individual in this group makes $90,000 at the end of their career. So they would need to replace about $72,000 worth of income. So that's what that would come into. Go to the next slide. This is just a summary of what income replacement you can expect. And this is based on age 66 full retirement, 10 years of service, 20, 30 years of service. So for a 30-year employee, you would receive 51% of your high five average salary at age 66. Typically, you'd also receive about 32% of your income in Social Security. So that combined, you've exceeded that 80%. So long-term employees really do make up what they need to thrive in retirement from a financial perspective. When you are less service, you need to, or if you start later, you need to kind of fund part of that gap, either with prior savings or savings while you're working with your public employer.
But that would be the 1.7% multiplier, right? So it doesn't account for the 1.9.
Correct. Yes. So an income gap is if your savings don't meet what you need from an income perspective, or you retire early, so you need more retirement savings, or you are an individual that worries about having enough in retirement. So the deferred compensation plan is a way to help save and pre-fund for that gap to alleviate those concerns. If you're curious, we have a toolbox on our website. There's lots of calculators, but one of them is how much will you need in retirement? So if you all wanted to do that, you can do that on our website. That's the link. All right. So what is deferred compensation plan? So our deferred comp plan is a 457B plan, similar to a 401k, 403B that are offered in different types of employment. You have the opportunity to save either pre-tax or post-tax. So you can do a Roth feature within the plan. It's available to all Minnesota public employees. So school districts, counties, cities, many of you probably already participate in the program, but it is offered and by statute, every employer has to offer it if an employee requests participation. So the only thing you need to do is enroll. It is subject to annual limits for contributions. You just decide on your contribution amount and you decide on your investments. And the contribution limits, the annual limits are pretty high now. Back early in my career, they were under 10,000. So it was really hard to kind of pre-fund that gap. Now they're much higher. So the 2025 limit for people under age 50 is 23,500. People over age 50, they allow more because they expect that people maybe didn't save earlier in their careers. There's a couple new features, age 60 to 63. You can even save more. That's a new provision that was adopted 2 years ago in the Secure Act. And then within 3 years of your normal retirement age, you can apply and choose to contribute more if you didn't fund to the cap early in your career. So that's called a 3-year special catch-up. So folks that maybe had kids and couldn't save early, but now the kids are gone and on their own, you can choose to contribute more if you wish. That cap is also both pre-tax and Roth. So either you can do combined between the two, or you can do all to Roth or all to pre-tax. You choose your investments. I just throw these slides in there because we do encourage diversification. I won't go into the investment portion of it, but that's just a picture of what diversification looks like. We do have target retirement funds available for individuals who are more hands-off investors and would rather just have it taken care of for you. Or you can choose your own investment mix between the investment options available. We also have a self-directed brokerage option if folks want to do ETFs or invest in ETFs or want something really specific, they can do that. There's a $30 fee for the subdirector approach, so. I'm not gonna explain how participation works too, but there's a picture if you're curious. And there's some sample asset allocation. So we encourage people to, you know, always, you'd receive quarterly statements from this program. Review your quarterly statements, make sure it is the investment allocation that you wish. Because you can make changes to that. All right, and then next. That's just compliance language. From a tax perspective, so you can choose pre-tax savings. If you do choose pre-tax, when you do take the funds out, it is taxable income to you. It is taxed at your income rate, your ordinary income tax rate. There is a mandatory withholding of 20% from federal, and from state is now 6.25%. If you choose Roth, you have to have your Roth account established for 5 years in order to have tax-free distributions. And the distributions have to take place, or the withdrawals have to take place after age 59 and a half. What I tell folks is if you're considering this, put some money in Roth, at least the first year you contribute, because then you are starting that 5-year clock and you can get that satisfied really early on. Don't have to worry about having future contributions subject to tax-free. The other plan features that I just wanted to highlight, so the deferred compensation plan is affordable. So if you do leave state service or public service and you want to roll it over to another qualified plan, you can do that. You can roll into an IRA, you can roll into a 403B or 450 or 401k if you have them, or vice versa. You can roll those into the plan. There are low fees in this program because we have economies of scale. The investment fees are very low. Our administrative fee is a maximum of $125 a year, so it's 10 basis points. So 0.10% of the account balance up to a cap of 125,000. So if you have more than 125,000 in there, not paying additional fees. It's 100% vested. So we talked in this group about vesting. So once these contributions are in the plan, they're in there, they're for your use. There are some options for in-service distributions as well. So if you have an unforeseen emergency, if you have after age 59 and a half, you can take in-service distributions. And then for the purposes of this group, you can do purchases of service credit as well. So that is an allowable distribution under the program. The money is held in trust. And then there is, unlike 401ks or 403bs, there's no 10% withdrawal penalty. So if you do take distributions or withdrawals prior to age 59 and a half, there's no additional penalty of 10%. Here's where the savings, so the first two slides are slides we standardly have in our materials. So clearly, if you start saving earlier, you have a longer investment horizon to create your larger balance. So person A started saving at 30 for 36 years. They invested $100 a paycheck, that's it. And so they invested $93,600 over their career, but their account balance using a 6% return is over 300,000. So because they had that long investment horizon, they were able to accumulate more assets. Person B is a person starting a little bit later. They contribute less because they have a shorter period, but also accumulate less. And person C at age 50 has even less time. But again, that's $100 a pay period. So if you were to contribute more, of course, that would be a higher balance at the end. The next slide just shows the difference if you just did $200 a pay period over 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. So some of the folks that are maybe in this group, that's what you could expect to have after 10 years, $71,000. And then the green bar is what you earned from an investment perspective, and then the blue bar is what you contributed. And then the final accumulation was the calculation that I did. And what I did was assuming a starting salary of $60,000, because that seemed to be the average based on the data that we had. Contributing 2% per year, 4% per year, or 6% per year, with a 2.5% salary increase over the career. And what the investment earnings and total contributions will look like. So I'll start at the bottom. So 30-year career. 2% per year. So that's $1,200 per year. So that's really like that $100 per paycheck roughly. They would have close to $129,000 from a total account value. If you just bump that to 4% per year, you're in the 260, I think it's 268,000. If you do 6% per year, you're getting close to $400,000 from a total account value. So, and that's 6% per year just is starting at $3,600 a year. So it's a lot for some folks, but it is also like, look at the end result is pretty significant. The next set of bars is really for 20 years, what you can expect, because you have that 10 fewer years before retirement age. Any questions on this? Okay. So that's really kind of what I was charged with. Happy to answer any questions about the program. It's been around since 1971. We have $11 billion, over 100,000, so I've been around for a bit. And we're proud of the growth. And that means Minnesota people are very good savers, by the way, when we compare ourselves to other states. So, yeah.
You're in retirement, then you don't have to switch into your own private program. You just continue in the deferred comp, yeah?
Yeah, you can continue in deferred comp. You don't have to move money. You could if you wish. We won't start contacting you to take out money until you reach the required minimum distribution age, which is age 73. And there's a lot of flexibility for withdrawals. So you can choose like a monthly amount if you wish. You can choose quarterly. You could do an annual amount that's paid every year. You can change it. So it's very flexible. You can also just do partial lump sums. So some folks, the retirees like the Viking River cruises. So they might take a chunk out and take a really fun cruise that they planned for. So there's lots of flexibility.
So I always feel like I know deferred comp because I've been doing it for years, so I'm very proud of that for my financial stuff. But the 59.5 I thought was on Roth. And there was no penalty if it was 59.5 or you had 5 years of service. Does that apply to all the funding that you've put in as well? For the penalty, that it's an and?
Let me read. I think I understand, but if I don't answer your question, ask it again. So withdrawals in the pre-tax bucket of money they have no 10% penalty, and they're available 30 days after you separate service. So there's no 59.5 penalty associated with that. For pre-tax or for Roth dollars, you have to have at least 5 years in the plan and take the distributions after age 59.5 in order not to have a penalty. So there is a bit of an age requirement for the Roth dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Well, great presentation, thank you. Not together, and I think it's really relevant on this discussion. Many decades I've seen this visual of a three-legged stool. Retirement, Social Security, pension. I think this has got a lot of really neat features that my benefit plans don't have. Counted 6, so it's an option. It's an option to participate or not. Options to change contribution rates over time. Options on how to invest. Options on pre-tax, post-tax. Distribution options, and it's no intergenerational inequity whatsoever. It's all tied to that person. So these are all really nice features, and I think important part of the balance of those. Very nice.
Comments or questions?
We have Dave Deal.
One clearly.
Why is is there a mandatory tax rate of 20% federal, 6% Minnesota? Why doesn't it just go off of how much your income is? And how much you took out during that year?
So the IRS requires it, so it's not a rule that we have. So there's 20% withholding, and then Department of Revenue requires 6.25% for Minnesota residents. So it's a requirement, but at the end, what happens, you get a 1099-R, so like a tax statement. And so if your taxable income is less than that 20%, then you would get that back in a refund. If it's more, you might owe more. So some folks choose to have more than 20% withheld, just depending on their tax situation. So in the end, you're taxed at your ordinary income rate, but initially we just have to, we're required to take out that addition, that 20% or 6.25%.
If you roll it as a direct rollover, you don't 20%. Right, yeah. That's
Correct, unless they roll it after their RMDH, then we take the required minimum distribution for the year and then roll the rest.
Can I just ask one tangential kind of question? So, healthcare savings plans, post-employment healthcare savings plans, right, also through MSRS. Is there the same ability, like any public employer can opt into that plan if somebody designates? You just maybe give me a little bit of information.
Sure, the healthcare savings plan is by employer. They can choose to participate, and then they within the employer, they would have different bargaining units, personnel policies that would define the terms that are contributed to the plan. The difference with healthcare savings plan is the whole group has to follow the same parameters. So there's no choice in, like, if you wanted to contribute more, you can't make that choice. Your whole group has to contribute the same. There's different tiers and things we can do, but generally, like, everybody's doing the same amount. You can choose your investments is where you get some choice, depending on your time horizon.
But if an employer is interested in public employers, they can rules, they can call you guys here.
Yes, we have over 700 public employers in the state participating.
Thank you.
Any last comments or questions before we move to item 2? Thank you, Erin. So agenda item 2 is the primer on withdrawal liability. The cost to the MSRS or para general plan of moving employees out of the general plan to a new plan or sub-plan. And that will be started off by Doug Anderson and then Erin. Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks. So I was going to give this primer on withdrawal liability, what it means to para. So withdrawal liability is the amount unfunded benefit cost that shift from one group of members and employers to another group of members. So really, we don't want to see the cost of one group shifted to basic premise. So this can occur when it has occurred at para or in para covered employers in our general plan cease to participate in it. And this has really been limited to healthcare organizations that privatize. So when a hospital or a nursing home, any healthcare entity has private, their members are prospectively covered by the private entity, and there has been whatever they've earned in para stays in para and will be paid for them. But there's often an unfunded liability. So, like, we have strived at para that if a hospital or some other entity leaves and there's an unfunded liability tied to their employees, we ask for that entity to pay for the unfunded liability so that the cost doesn't shift to all the remaining members in that plan. That's what's actually happening. Another example is a situation that we're we're talking about now is that if a group of active members stop participating in a para plan, by forming a new plan, we have a very similar concept. They will have earned benefits in the existing general plan. Those benefits may not have already been fully funded. We want that group of members or their employer to pay for their share of the unfunded liability, so it doesn't get spread among the remaining members. The same concept. So the precedent for this, for the Fair Board has had a long-term position that we shared some of these at the first meeting. Really to not want to see what I would describe. If a group leaves, they want to be sure that there's a payment or a series of payments to sufficiently fully fund the cost for that group, so it's not borne by the rest of the members. And there's been legislation for this for decades. And any of you who've been around the legislation last 5 years know that we have been actually successfully modified the language to better provide that protection to our existing members. So the change in the process, change in the amount to it should make it fit for purposes much better. And this is a very common practice in private multi-employer plans. So our plan is called a multi-employer plan. We have over 2,000 employers in it. We share the cost. If you look at out in the private universe of any multi-employer plan, I don't think you could find one that doesn't have. This is what protects the employer from other employers leaving. Sometimes we hear horror stories about this, but it's a very common practice. The discussion to date for us, the discussion's been a bit limited, but it is in the original mandate of this work. So in the legislation that was created for what this group is tasked to do, was listed that this group should consider the financial impact resulting from the cessation of benefit accruals of one plan. And that's talking about the SARS plan and the so this group is tasked with looking at this. The parents actuary, GRS, they did present information on the withdrawal liability or the impact of the plan at the para board meeting that members of this group were invited to observe, as well as the GRS also presented directly to this work group on August 18th, talked about this withdrawal liability component, noting where in their report that date, August 18th, their presentation that was covered on a couple pages there. And it's also been listed on the list of the also care staff just putting up in front of us. Next question is, how should the amount be determined? And it's a bit of a challenge to this. There's a very clear process in the statutes, and is part of what we worked hard to make very clear in the last few years. But that methodology doesn't really work. That methodology works for a privatizing entity, because when the employees of that group, upon privatization, we know what their benefits are. We know their final average salary, we know their service. They no longer accrue any service, including no further accrual of their salary. So their future salary do not impact their final average salary. So we know we know exactly what they're going to be paid at their outrageous retirement age, or how to calculate it or the impact reduction. So we can calculate that liability more directly and assess it to the employer through very direct calculation. in this instance with the new plan, the member would no longer have benefit accruals in the general plan. They have benefit accruals in the new plan. But their final average salary doesn't freeze in the general plan. It will continue to grow in the combined service approach. So it's a different calculation needed than what's trying to exactly. Similar concept, well, trying to get the right amount, it's just the calculation that's defined in statute.
Clarify question. The general plan, are you talking MSRS?
I'm just talking about
Coordinated.
the coordinated plan.
Okay, that I just wanted.
Yeah,
There, the years I was confused.
yeah, we use the terminology. It's referencing the same plan. So the general employee retirement plan is the official plan name. It's also called the coordinated plan. And we're just talking about what's the para statute. And also what our action represented was just for. And so what we looked for with the actuary when they did their study, they determined for us, for the group that the study is done on, an amount which is called the present value of future benefits. And that means for this particular group for which a new plan would apply, in today's dollars, a single value, what's the value of the future benefits that they will accrue in the general plan? Nothing changes. Then they look at, well, what's the present value, single dollar value today of all the contributions that the plan is expected to get from the members and the employee. 14% pay. Trying to say, if this plan leaves, goes to a new plan, keeps their existing liability, but no longer accrue, and we no longer accrue more benefits, and we no longer get the contributions, what happens to the plan? Better off? And the plan would be worse off by these measurements, because it's losing more future contributions than the cost of providing that. Losing $33 million worse off. That's the look at, well, what does it mean to the members, current existing members in the general plan, if this group leaves? And better off or worse off? This is a measurement saying that the plan would be. That's what we talk about with the withdrawal liability, is that we don't want the remaining group of members to be adversely affected in a claims. That's what we look at from a general plan perspective or consider withdrawal liability. A different way to look at this would be, and I'm actually going to ask to advance one more slide. This is something that we shared at one of the meetings about. It was there to talk also about the potential new cost of the plan, but that's not necessarily relevant for this discussion. I'd like you just to focus on the orange line. The orange line says that the general plan is collecting 14% of pay contributions. And it ultimately needs 9% of pay to pay for what's called the normal cost of benefits as they occur. So the plan is collecting 5% that's going to pay for the unfunded liability and 9% to cover the cost for active members. So a different way, this plan needs 5% of pay all existing members for another 8, 9 years to pay off the unfunded liability. So that would be another way of looking at this, is that if this group leaves, this plan no longer is collecting 5% of pay from this new group of members, the plan would be worse off by that amount. That means other members would have to cover that. Different way of looking at it. And the difference really between these two approaches has more to do with time period of which this cost is spread out. So the first one is spread out over a longer period of time. Second approach is shorter. So there's currently no suggested approach in statute. We look to measurements we think would be reasonable, but that the existing plan would need to remain also the cost. The final slide.
I want to be crystal clear what you mean here, though. If the alternate approach is one we're going to pick, what you are saying right now to the group is that whatever the total cost of the new pension plan is, you would want 5% more for 9 years to pay this off. So the question then would be, who pays for that? First are saying, we're not paying. That means whatever the employees are going to pay additionally for 5% to that.
If it's done over that time period.
Right, just to be clear, so that everybody understands what we're talking here. Nicole?
Would this be resolved if there was a sub-plan? I know Para's not a fan of those, but creating a sub-plan rather than a completely new plan, would that change the liability?
No, it wouldn't. This is a cost to provide benefits. And it will exist whether it's done, whether a new plan has existed separately or if it's part of a new plan. We're talking entirely about benefits that have already been proved but haven't been.
But you're also talking about taking that money and moving it. But if it was am I not following that right? That it's a sub-plan?
Yeah, with there'd be a new plan established. The cost of the benefits that have been earned by the members stays in the old plan. The assets that have been contributed by those members and their employers stays in the old plan. New plan starts from scratch. New liabilities start to accrue, new contributions start going in. We've been talking a lot about that, the new plan, new liabilities, new contributions, that's fresh. And stays in the old plan. The contributions to date haven't been enough to cover the cost of that.
But you keep saying new plan, but if it's, and I know you don't care for sub-plans, but isn't there another group that has a sub-plan under Para or one of them that's under MSRS? That's what I'm trying to figure out is if it's a sub-plan under the general plan specific to this group.
If we did a sub-plan for this group, it would be the exact same story. The cost would still be.
The reason for that is the new benefit earned under the new supplemental plan be a separate calculation. You'd still carry all of the old calculation in the existing remaining plan.
Right. I just didn't know if a sub-plan would solve that by leaving, because we're still operating underneath a general plan, just so.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is somebody has to pay that 5%.
Thank you.
Sure.
Here.
Okay, so let's say that there's a handful of people that want to opt out. Anybody that leaves, whether it's one person or two people, hurts the plan, correct?
Because the plan is unfunded.
So in order for them to opt out, they would have to pay their remaining years in accrued liability. Whatever that is calculated to be.
Like the purpose is to saying this is a bit of a theoretical.
Right.
Because people need
The ability to opt out is only if you keep your pre-tax contributions the same. So that means for a new plan, if you want to allow current members to opt out, their pre-tax contributions have to remain at 6.5%. And then post-tax, after tax, that's when the additional contributions have to be taken from. That's the only opportunity there is for an election.
But if we focus on your question and just say, the idea of the opt-out is that instead of going to the new plan, you stay in general plan. You're not leaving the general plan, so you wouldn't have to pay withdrawal liability.
really, if you're staying in the general plan, you are going to continue to pay this.
That's right. There's no withdrawal liability in that case. Yeah. Okay.
Does MSRS have the same issue? We do not, for a couple of reasons. So we are proposing the sub-plan, so everyone's gonna stay in the general plan. But the other big difference is that we are roughly 100%. So we don't have an unfunded liability that needs to be covered. So all of our assumptions is single level membership in our plan, that's not gonna change. What will change is the normal cost benefits for this group going forward. So that's where the additional contributions will be needed, but we don't have the same withdrawal liability concern because of our funded status.
Madam Chair, Doug, when you started your presentation, were you talking about layered amortization at the beginning, how we look at things now for the generational inequities? My question is, are we looking at a 15-year time period to pay this off, or are we looking at like maybe 2048, like some of the other funds, if you understand the question?
Yeah, I think I do. And if we could just go to the final slide, if I can maybe answer more broadly and first, and then get to that second point. So here's a question. From the pure board perspective, it's about keeping that plan whole and those existing members protected. So that's what Pear's position is. Pear doesn't have a position about who pays for it or when. So it could be shared, it could be paid by the employees, the employers, legislature, if there's time to do that, any combination. The issue really is to think that plan will not to the group pays for it. And then how it's paid over time. Too, there's flexibility in that, whether it's a lump sum or whether it's paid over a period of time. And so the example of the 5% is that's in that line is based on an assumption that all assumptions are going to be perfectly met, time is fully funded, that contribution is no longer needed. I mean, that could be the deal that is struck here. That 5% of pay until that date. Or different deal could be struck to say we need payments, 15 years, 20 years. Anything that's sort of actually equivalent to 33 million would be spread out over whatever period of time. So whoever pays for it over whatever period of time doesn't really matter. So the layered amortization talk about specific periods of time. None of the numbers I've shown here are connected to that. They could be.
So to simplify it, it's the equivalent of a 15 or 20-year mortgage versus a 30. If you kick it out 30 years, your payment may be less. So you might be able to reduce that 5% down because you're extending the period in which to pay it. Because you know, I don't know the difference in the group here, everybody has different knowledge. To work with, but I think a mortgage example is a good one when it comes to pensions, how long. 100% funded, because being new to the group, I'm a little shocked at the number, and I think some folks are that it's that high, but I understand the numbers are what they are. I don't give a messenger, if I could have it one more. The other question I had, it's on a much smaller scale, using the example you gave, when a police officer, for example, decides they want to become a state law enforcement officer, right? Their money stays in Perno over here. They go over to MSRS, start contributing whatever's required over there. Yet in a sense, doesn't the benefit continue over here? Because at the end of their career, it's combined service. So that's where I'm a little confused. If we had 20 police officers go to MSRS, obviously hurts the P&F fund, but they don't get additional money that they have to pay, do they? Or get that combined service benefit? Because they're high fives based on what they made as a state law enforcement officer, not when they stopped at the 20-year mark. Does that make sense? Why that's a little confusing to me, because it seems like it's almost the same thing, that we're stopping over here with PNF, we're coming over to MSRS, yet at the end, the benefit is based on the last 5 years of our salary, and that money sat over here. I hope I'm trying to explain it the way I'm thinking about
I mean, it
it.
shows an issue with the plans of combined service, right? That like by having combined service and providing that flexibility to members, some plans do have to need it more than other plans. It happens in the general and in the maintenance plan. That's a cost of providing that option for the membership.
And is that figured in as a percent to pay or not? So I just asked because I've never seen a figure that says this is what combined service costs. I see.
It depends on the plan. So each plan has a portion, I can't remember what it's called. It's a little bit of the cost associated with the benefit of the normal cost that is attributed to the CSA benefit. So for example, our judges plan does not have that built in because their high five is higher. So they're not eating costs associated with like PRA. PRA general has a little bump in their normal cost total for combined service because there are some judges who will have a high five, and then they're going to have to pay for that from the PRA fund. So it's an art, not a science, but it is reviewed periodically by the LCPR. Just did a review of our CSA loads. Load is the word.
And Jim? So when you're talking about 5% assessed to essentially make up the balance here, which is no longer being contributed. The 5% is assessed to all, right? Even brand new spanking employees, or just those that were part of the existing? How's that work?
See, like right now, everyone in the general plan is being assessed at 5%. So that's existing now. So if a group leaves and thus isn't assessed that in that plan, that's got to be assessed some. And that's kind of the question here. And that it's
So it could be, it could also be, there's lots of ways to assign that, but that's it. I got it.
Excuse my not the best understanding of all this, but separate from this withdrawal liability, prior to that, in general, the discussion is getting a plan fully funded yet. And so there's always a date that at which the plan becomes fully funded, and then one anticipates, depending on market and how things went, the cost of the plan, the cost to either employer combination, whatever, withdraw, right? But that's a separate matter with this. This is a separate thing. There would be this would be the additional thing to cover the withdrawal liability. And then you're saying that could be assessed. You'd want the money covered. What time frame it gets covered on is not a position period takes. And so that would be amount to be determined to be assessed to however, in what time frame. When we have these discussions, I'm always wondering a bit, as we're talking about intergenerational equity pieces. It seems to me that those many years out then would get a drop for the cost in the original funding of it. And then depending on the timing of this, there would be, that issue is at play also. That makes me question intergenerational equity working in reverse. I don't know if I'm understanding much of that. Maybe I'm way off, but
Well, I think in short, it's the current generation of members are paying more than what we're expecting in the future because they're paying for an unfunded liability that exists. That is the fact of how this is. Something that's the long-term goal is to get away from all of that. That's why we want to see plans. Stay there. Challenge for these. Every plan.
does that not put the burden on those who build it at the expense of those who have not worked to build it but benefit from it later? Again, limited understanding.
Yeah.
That's the concern that I continue to see, that there's a generation of workers here that have recognized that the rule of 90 people, although I still got coworkers that will be going into the rule of 90 have not paid any of these pieces, I believe. And then we're trying to come to the recognition that we need to make a shift for the people who are doing this work now, those who will be doing it in the future. And it's hard. It's very hard for every entity here to figure that part out, but that somehow it's put in. We're looking for those who are coming after us, everyone who's speaking, and we want to do that. We always have, but somehow it's getting the costs keep adding and more pressure on those who are doing the work that are in the trenches on this.
I like how Mike said it about the not shooting the messenger because you've compiled important information for us. So I appreciate that. My question I'm still grappling with, this matrix was making me a little bit excited when I saw it because one of the biggest takeaways for me was you found an opportunity to do normal retirement age at 60 for 1.8% with a 2% multiplier and a effective COLA. Me, I was stunned that it got that low. And here we're being told that a $33 million liability is 5% contribution for 9 years. So it seems like a lot. But my question for you, Doug and Amy, is I know there are certain things that Para wants and has philosophies with regarding a plan, a separate plan within a plan. At the end of the day, MSRS is able to do this only because they're fully funded without a cost, or are there little things in there that could reduce that 5% to be a smaller number, plan administration wise, whether it stays in the plan or not? Would the sub-plan get you any savings on that 5% cost?
Yeah, some trade, I'm not sure what about a sub-plan can really change the very mechanics of benefits have been earned, money's been collected. That's about, there's the gap. There's that gap. And we can talk about spreading it, the payment over a period of time. We could even talk about the risk part of this is that a group will say, well, we'll pay 5% a year for 9. We'll pay 5% a year until the plan is fully funded. and hope that it happens in 3 years. But it could happen in 20 years. So there's a let's make a deal element.
Yeah.
To this, about who has the risk. And it carries the perspective about not wanting to see the risk or the cost for one group come back to it.
It's just that, like, is an actuary looking at that number like on a regular basis to see like, okay, now you're fully funded, so maybe it goes.
One more comment. So the whole withdrawal liability thing I've always struggled with. So group leaves and there's withdrawal liability, wouldn't every single time an employee with goes to the private sector or wherever they go, they're entitled to a full benefit at 66. Shouldn't they pay withdrawal liability when they leave? Because they're gonna get that full benefit, even though there's an underfunding that they're leaving behind, they won't be paying off. So just that always has been sort of a struggle for me, that will conceptually. The other thing that's missing is that the withdrawal liability is paid by one additional entity, which is parent. So that list would actually be 5 bullets. If we were to just be, this is a para presentation, so you wouldn't include that, but that would be.
And I think our board would have concern with like.
And again, I'm not saying para would accept it, I'm just saying that we put all the cards on the table, that would be a 5th bullet.
Saying that the parent general plan is going to eat the cost.
Withdrawal liability, because again, para general gets it every time someone walks out the door with full benefit. Right? So
all the 1,800 he quit.
Yeah, there'd be impact.
more contributions coming in, but a full benefit entitled.
Or subsidies all around.
Yes.
That there's groups, people that leave early, people that die early, they subsidize the people that live longer. Terminate early, sometimes subsidize the people that stay longer. This is an element of this plan that all kinds of examples. And it's all of that stuff gets built into the cost. So if we assume that whenever someone left, they had to they take their fair share. It was a totally, it'd be called the defined contribution plan.
I was gonna say that, Susan, as you lay that out, I think that only comes to actuality, the position is not. So if they're the probation officer who leaves Aiken County, and then we hire a new probation officer, there might be a little break in the contribution to para, but before long, there's that money flowing back to para that the employee is making up, if I do the arithmetic correct, with the extra 1.5%. The employer is paying 3.5, the employee is 1.5. To get to that 5.
The new employee getting drawn down.
Right, but that's not, but they're paying for the accrued liability, not their current accruing liability. So if the 5% is paying for the extra, then the 5% that all of us in the para general plan are paying is not benefiting us, it's benefiting the accrued liability. And so if you come in as a new employee, you don't have that, right? You're actuarially, you should be paying 9% as a normal cost.
Um,
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, then Tammy goes next.
We're spending a lot of time on this $33 million. In the grand, and it's in the legislation that it needs to be identified. In the grand scheme of things, how significant is $33 million? For you, Sarah,
You have a check.
Well, it's a $30 billion fund, so you can look at it that way. That's gonna be an issue. Why is that? We just go back to the real part of this is like, is it fair? For one group to leave, and have the cost shift to another. Is that? That's. Because it could go on to any other level of whatever size that could be. That leaves as well. And group after group could leave. And groups that don't get to leave, not only don't plan apply to them, they are payment consequences. So that's the scale, but it's about the principle of this is for. Thank you.
Was there, just going on past practice questions in terms of when the new correctional plan was created? Was this part of that?
All of the status.
So this would be a new liability put on this.
It's existing for privatizing entities. For employers and statutes now, so it's, the concept is there in the statute. This is the first time since the correctional plan that we're discussing making a plan, so by default, yes, but it is existing for privatizing.
And I guess I'm just gonna bring this back around to kind of a little bit of what Jim was saying as well, is the fact that we are looking at the fact that, you know, we've heard a lot about intergenerational inequity. And this gap group is really paying for the Rule 90, and we're paying on this side. And somehow we keep getting stuck right smack in the middle of paying for both ends. And so that's where I think you see a lot of frustration. So.
It should be understandable. That exact same argument applies to all the other active members of the general plan. Then if the withdrawal liability is paid, would have the additional. There's one more thing that they're asking to pay. That you've got up.
Yeah. I see that. But you could.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to argue that, yeah, it's unfortunate to every active member in this plan. That they're paying an extra 5% over and above any employers. It's unfortunate that they're all having to pay 5% more than what they should have to. That's no argument here. That's not. It's right. That's not how a plan should work. The contribution should be near the normal cost, 9%. That's how it should be. That applies to everything. And the concern or what we're trying to avoid is now shifting off from one to another, make it be worse.
Tanya, and then Mike. So this make sure I'm understanding this. What the conversation? 5% to fund the plan. What was that conversation about? How this would impact current members and future.
It's conversations over many years. So the contributions used to be probably 4% employee, 4% employer. They kept getting bumped up as different things happened to the plan. Different investment returns, different circumstances over many years where it said, okay, we need to make more, and benefit improvements too. There've been benefits. So it's been gradually built up over this period of time, and when those contributions have increased, it's also been, well, this is what we're going to need for the next 40 years or 30 years. So these are increases done many years ago that were put in place with the expectation that they're going to be there for a long time. So there's progress being made with getting closer to that. There can start to be discussions prospectively about gradually lowering contributions. That's possible years, but it was a many different steps over many different years for really many.
So to clarify, though, the other plan members won't be
you're adding more money into the plan. You're just saying, generally, they're paying for it, but there's no addition to them, there'd be an addition to us. Yes.
Pay the 5% longer, right?
Yeah, but again, they're not, the contributions are changing or the employer's not, they're not gonna change.
Yeah, it'd be unlikely that there would be a need to go and say, we need to have a higher contribution from an employee. What would happen is that the future changes get pushed off. They'll get tracking that. They wait longer to get a reduction, they wait longer to get a.
What kind of, yeah. Secondly, why related to informational discussion, how can we wait until now to see this? This would be.
We haven't had the opportunity to present a lot of different items other than what has been asked of, like the basic knowledge.
This is kind of massive in the group.
And we're
I mean, it's
running
like
them
the rail
when we can. I hear you, but we haven't had.
So it's subtle but deadly.
Sometimes.
And so, I mean, I can't remember what the total amount of para staff that would break into the new plan. It was like a couple thousand, right, or something. 3,000 versus the hundred, you know, it's like 164,000 in the general para plan now. So. It's like the, on such a, you know, we've got the small group of these couple thousand. And then that intergenerational piece of the, making the transition and the hopes for helping the youngers and those to be hired. But the concentration of this is like it's like a nuclear warhead hitting those of us in this older range. And we're kind of doing that, you know, because we've tried to get a plan going now for many, many years. You know, there could have been employer offsets of some of these things, you know, as we're trying to do stuff there. So somehow it's all ending up here on us right now, and the older ones of us right now, it just kind of keeps getting magnified in these ways. That's more of a comment, I guess.
I'm sorry, I know I'm not an official member of the table, but I just wanted to clarify, and then I know I'm sure you want to move on to other things, move past the $33 million elephant in the room. But is this issue based on the privatization statute that passed this year? That was the big.
It's not the same methodology, but it's the same.
Is that also already existing?
It is, it's effective in 2025, nope, 2027. Yeah. July 1 of 2027.
We could sneak this in.
It has nothing, that statute has nothing to
Yeah,
do with.
it's the concept of it, right? So
Okay.
It's not.
Okay, I heard the statute part and I was looking through and I was like, well, not privatize it. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood that.
All right, remaining on item 2, Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
It was asked, so basically I confirmed with our actuary. We would have a clear on my voting because of our status.
Any other comment or question on item 2 before we move to social security?
So as
Alina,
Sorry, I realized when I was running through the agenda of what's been added, I didn't tell you about the document that got brought up that I put just a printed copy. I did it in that hour and a half before this meeting. I had everybody's number, so it is just a draft. And it's a long doc.
so the whole time,
Yes,
with the label in it.
yeah. So I just wanted to point that out in case nobody's picked it up yet. If we get to these conversations. I just wanted to have, try to put all the numbers in one place instead of looking at like 5 or 6 different memos. Again, I did it this morning once I had everyone's numbers. So if you see a number that doesn't look like what you said me, let me know. We can make it quickly for the group. Point it out. I'll get a couple more copies. Yeah, I can go run more copies.
Thank you for joining us. It was wonderful to see it all in one place. And also just want to give a shout out to staff. I know there was work happening over the weekend and above and beyond, so thank you. And then to Amy and security.
So as Kara's looking, and spending time, just in the space to figure out what all we need to do, we have been consulting with our tax counsel, Ice Miller, on various issues. One of them relates to social security. And when you create a new plan, you have to have a social security election. This does not impact current members. So current members who will move over to a new plan would retain their social security coverage. It impacts new hires. And so what we have to do at Para is to run a social security referendum within 2 years for new hires. And there's 2 ways to do this vote. One is majority, which means if everyone votes yes, everyone's in. If they vote no, no one's in. Or divided vote. And divided vote means that your vote, if you vote no, it's only you, new hires, and those that vote yes are in social security. Para can instruct how this referendum is conducted. I believe we would do divided vote, which means that those that would vote no are only impacting themselves to not be in social security. Those that vote yes, the new hires would be in social security. Again, we'd have to conduct this vote within 2 years. So just an FYI of work that Para would have to do on behalf of this.
So essentially, they look like a police and fire plan.
They can choose. So like we had this happen in the correctional plan.
So if they choose yes.
They remain in the social security, right? So what happened in the correctional plan was that we did not do this when we were supposed to do it. And 20 some years later, we realized that we didn't do it. And so we had to do it. So one of the benefits of having done that is now we know these things. And so we can do the correct thing when we need to do the correct thing. So we have to do this within 2 years. We've worked with the employers to help run the election. For months, it's not significant administration. I do want to note that it is time and it is money for Para to conduct this election, but we can manage that.
So new members after the election period then are automatically.
If we do a divided vote, so we would do a divided vote, which means, and this does not impact it's just talking about Para. If we do a divided vote, which is what we would do, those that voted no, and it's only the new hires within this 2-year period. So whenever the plan is effective, so is that January 1 of 2027? Right, so January 1 of 2027 to January 1 of 2029, those new hires would take a vote. If they voted no, only them themselves would not be coordinating with Social Security. Those that voted yes, and the new hires going forward would be coordinated with Social Security. I don't know. But also like, it's a big decision and like something Doug and I have talked about is that this group is making decisions that are going to impact future generations. And to hold that decision is really weighty. And so that's why we prefer the divided vote, because then if you're going to vote no, you're only impacting yourself. Versus a majority vote, if you vote no, you could potentially impact everyone. So that's why we're doing a divided vote. If this happens, we would do a divided vote.
All the propaganda and stuff going on about the health of Social Security and stuff like this, and the impact of people making an unwise choice. Because they're not properly informed or legacy of knowledge.
There have to be an education campaign done, right? And that would be something that.
But to fight against the propaganda for these guys making. Yeah.
No, I was going to get you saying.
Other comments or questions for Amy? All right, well then, thank you, Amy. We'll move on to number 4, deciding the new plan features and definitions for a new MSRS administered subplan. We'll turn it over to Aaron, and I think after this item, We'll try and think about it to the
So over the last handful of weeks, I've met with our stakeholders from MSRS only, so I think I captured everyone. I talked to LALS, MAPE, POC, and then TPS was also informed, but I didn't hear anything back. So what we kind of all came to somewhat agreement on is that past service was not part of the discussion for this future sub-plan, just because that's kind of a separate item that has different costs associated with it. Also, we did not make a determination on who, if the employee and employer contribution help would be split. So that's a separate conversation. And what the group agreed to was mostly general plan provisions with a few exceptions. The first choice is a multiplier of 2.0% per year. If that is not financially viable, 1.9% would be an option as well, which is what the existing general plan has. So that would not be an additional cost. Full retirement age of 60 is the first preference. Again, if it's not financially viable, 62 is kind of the next choice if we get to that place. Early retirement would be 55, actuarial equivalent like the general plan, COLA 1.75. Disability definition would be the same. Surviving spouse and children benefits the same, refund rule is the same. And then we propose, instead of having the CSA process from a high five salary perspective, we would use the mixed service concept where the individual could collect their new sub-plan dollars, their retirement, and then postpone their general plan benefit without impacting their high five. So those were the provisions that we found agreement on, with a few variations depending on costs. And then the definitions, we at MSRS, all of our, unlike PRA, all of our participation is determined by job class or job code. And so these are the job classifications that would be included. The radio communications operators and supervisor and the PSAP manager are all, that's the name of the 911 telecommunicator type role at the state. And then further down, the correctional agents series is the probation type officer role at the state. So these are the folks that would be covered by the new sub-plan. It's roughly 400, just over 400 people. Based on our data we were able to gather.
And then Erin, I know you have another document under the same agenda item. You want to combine both of those so that
Sure.
they're related?
Yeah.
Go ahead, about the definition.
So the definition of public safety telecommunicator, so you're covering state patrol. Right? What about Metro Transit?
So I reached out to Metro Transit to determine if they don't believe that their role is a 911 telecommunicator role. So based on the position description, so I didn't include them. And then MAC, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, they actually are in PRA coordinated. So I didn't know that. Found that out. So University of Minnesota. I did not research University of Minnesota. University of Minnesota gets to choose the retirement plans that their employees participate in. So the regents decide. So that would be kind of a different, they do that today. So that's a different setup. That makes sense. Yeah.
Does that mean they have to be covered?
The regions would have to decide they're covered either by our sub-plan or by the PRA plan. So the University of Minnesota, like their police team or force or group is covered by PNF, but some of their employees are covered by the MSRS general plan. And then some of their employees are covered by their own plan that they administer at the U. So I don't know where the current pool of folks participate. I don't know if they're at PRA or service.
Going back to Metro Transit, who said that they don't? Or don't think they do?
So based on, we contacted their payroll and HR folks and they sent us the information. I forwarded on to LCPR. It doesn't seem like they do, but I don't know enough to know, I guess. So
I think we should check that out a little bit more on their behalf, because I think HRs might not necessarily know what's all going down on the, you know, operations or a division or something like that. They may think they know. And they should know, I mean, but I think to be fair, I think we dive a little deeper into that, particularly because I know possibly they could be added later or something like that, but the role of the telecommunicator with all this technology and stuff, it just keeps diverging constantly. And Metro Transit is definitely an entity that's been created because of this divergent. They now take transfer 911 calls to dispatch to their law enforcement. And that's fairly new in the last, my gosh, time flies around here, but I'm gonna say 5 years. Before that, no, they wouldn't have been deemed PSAP and they didn't take 911 calls, but now they do. And if technology evolves with routing over geographic area, they could be routed their own calls, making them a primary PSAP over time. But that routing today is not here yet, because we have other advancements to do at the network level and stuff, but it's going to happen. But so I didn't want to pass it by without interjecting these two stakeholders. Because you is the primary PSAP, they do get routed their calls from the whole campus, both campuses.
so then they would have to, the regions would have to do it. Because they use a land grant university, so we can't, as state, usually tell them what to do in statutes. So they have to, they have specific provisions in our statute that says that they determine who's participating.
And you're also a pretty big organization. It's not just the one campus.
So they would be made aware of this new plan, and then it would be up to them to ask that they participate. Is that how this works, or what?
So their HR benefits folks attend all of our meetings, so they're aware of this work group and company. So they'll be aware of the new plan being created. Just bring it to their regions.
What next steps do you want from me?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and maybe it's the percentage of calls that it seems that the bulk of their work is on dispatching buses, because that's their primary responsibility, and it seems like some of the calls are the transfer calls from the PSAP. But they didn't give me percentages or anything, so
They have different people doing different things.
We know who's like the director of Metro Transit, 'cause, I mean, I can send an email to that person, say, hey, we got this thing going on, you guys care, get involved.
Yes, I will. I do have those names and I can give them to you.
Yeah, when, I have Aaron's email, so I can go ahead and maybe even forward it out there and just say, we just want to confirm that you agree, you don't have any of these people, you don't want to be in this plan, that kind of thing.
I can tell you that their opinion is of the opposite. They want to
So
be, and they
we're
believe
talking
in
about their union, right? So maybe just send me everybody you can think of, like
ask them to do. Or no, they're separate.
Not have to check with Jim.
They're- They got an independent collective bargaining.
Yeah.
I think I do know the answer to that. I know it's somewhere, but I will.
great job. I'm just looking at your definition as well, and I'm noticing that it only goes as high as your district supervisors. You're gonna leave your regional supervisors and your field services director out. That I would guess that would be concerning at some point because you're not gonna have anybody wanting to promote up to your direct supervision over your units.
And, you know, I mean, the same could be said for the district supervisor, how much is actually happening with the interaction with the formerly incarcerated. And I mean, this happens all over. So, I feel like it's a good compromise, right? So we do have supervisors that will promote, not up to manager, director.
And so I know your regional supervisors take calls and they do lots of things, so I'm not in your system, but I would tell you that your regional supervisors do a lot of things on the fields.
And you know, the 50% at some point was a component of this, right? 50%
Oh, we
of
didn't,
work responsibility.
yeah, we talked about it, but didn't include it in the definitions, just because of the complexity.
And I mean, it kind of goes to the conversation. Right, what is the bulk of the work that's being done? It should be supervision. There's supervisors, right? Supervisor stuff, not necessarily.
Part of the discussion in the role of an agent or district supervisor, then they go to manager. That doesn't make sense when they split it, and then they go. Trying to explain that.
For us, all of those are the lower level, more caseloads. I think different caseloads. So I talked with Matt, that's the here, and to check to see if the application is right. And they represent the districts, but not anything else. We did advocate for anything about that.
That's what you're.
And I'm Chair, one more, I'm gonna speak for you. I'm gonna speak for my partner. So in the telecommunicator one, you left out one position. You covered the managers and you really just included that top individual who oversees all IT systems. And, you know, and like you guys say, that person usually comes from within and has worked their way up. Why are we one?
I'll be selfish. I would agree with that statement. Because it has been 32 years under the headset, overnights, snowstorms, sleep, a lot of those things. And at the same time, a lot of work, right? And a lot of expectation. And even as recent as worst thing I've experienced in a long time. I'm hearing the people speak. I'm the one that's shutting down traffic on Interstate 35 every morning. Hospital. Hospital. I might be a director and responsible for a ton of administrative things. But at the end of the day, my responsibility is to make sure that whenever any one of you call that phone is answered. Canada to Iowa. East. Let me add to it.
Communications director.
I'm a statewide director of communications for the
So,
control.
but on this definition, we would put you in there as radio communications director.
Is that your job?
Well, why don't we do it then?
Is that the job or class? So I sent this to DPS with my limited knowledge of what I've learned here, and they did not respond back. So I feel like you will need to talk to DPS. like Leah.
I don't know who at BPS that this went to, but I think it's.
So
Me too.
And the only other thing that I would add to this, so we're just full of, PD, I venture to guess dispatching is not number one. Right? And so, I mean, the notion behind it was that direct line, and obviously, had this been available to you for those 30 years, you would have been in that plan up until the time that you promoted to director. And at that time, then your duties shift, obviously. And maybe this isn't as big of a deal for DPS as it might be for corrections. When you start getting into supervision of folks that, used to do this and now our primary job is to supervise staff. Again, I start to wonder who else, it gets to be a very slippery slope for the Department of Corrections, because now anyone who is kind of in a administrative function is potentially like, should they be also in here based on kind of that notion that I used to do it or at one time or once in a while. It's the primary responsibilities that I believe we're focusing in here.
I was just thinking, Paula, I think, putting your HR hat back on is, I think a lot of the job descriptions aren't accurate. Anybody that manages or oversees a PSAP is never out the PSAP. We're in these walls, we're managing the operations, we're participating in the operations. Once you get up to commander, chief deputy, sheriff, they're gonna do our roles, and I think our job descriptions, yes, need to be prepared to shoot. We never leave those four walls. You're not administrative also into there.
And at the state, it's a little bit different, right? Our PTs are like, you're required to get them 3 years. They're going to be individually based as you do those, like the percentages, people are looking at them as part of the performance evaluations. It's a little bit regular. So, I mean, I can't speak to the PSAP side of this. That's out of my purview here. And so all I can tell you is that when you start to do supervision of staff as the primary responsibility, that becomes very problematic for the DPC in particular.
Right.
I would just offer a little experience, having done the trooper position for 31 years, and seeing very accurately, when it comes down to staffing levels, state patrol, PSAP is grossly understaffed, at both centers. It's all hands on deck, whether it's a blizzard or traumatic, and so I would hope that we can encompass this person unless somebody brings forward clear and convincing reasons when we don't.
Any objections to that? Susan, did you?
It's down, I'm gonna be on here, radio communications director.
Karen?
I just would like to get confirmation from DPS just to confirm, because, they are very sensitive to if this negotiation ends up having the employer pay a portion of this. They're sensitive to budgets and those sorts of things. I think it would only be fair to make sure that they see it. Yeah. So, and this is not personal towards you, so I don't envy your work. I just was drafting something based on what I knew. What folks shared.
Sure. I'm not taking it personal. I don't consider it personal. I'm getting close. So the chances are this isn't going to have a huge impact on me personally, right? It's the person that decides, do I want to fall into that position or not? Because I believe this group that it's really this proposal to not have that benefit for that person. So it's really about the next person. It's less about me. That is.
And I just need to add one more thing here. So this is where legislative intent would be really, really helpful, because I don't know the why. I don't understand the why. Quasi law enforcement, adjacent to public safety, but that's a lot of people. That's 4,300 people in my agency that are adjacent to public safety. So this is a problem, right? There is no, it's like, oh, well, we should throw them in, you know, I mean, we've kind of had this conversation already. So like we start to add more and more and more, I do feel like it becomes a slippery slope. It becomes SERP 2.0. And I'm sorry, I have to say it. And so it's really a concern to me if we just say, oh yeah, this one should come in. Again, I would love to see legislative intent as a part of this. So I can clearly identify who belongs.
So go ahead. So your Department of Corrections and their Department of Public Safety, I don't think anybody's trying to change DoorDash.
Right. So I just want to be clear, right? And that would be helpful to me with all of these, you know, okay, so their director's okay, but my director's not. Why? What is the difference? So that is important to me, and I would love to see that at some.
Mike, and then.
Yeah, I would love to. So yes, I do think your manager is a regional director, whatever the title is, the two. Tammy Jo identified that I know there's two. And that's what we were referring to in our conversation, was two. Not representing services. So it may be unrepresented, I don't know that. That's the two that we're referring to be. It wasn't that big.
And I mean, you have your regional supervisors, your field services director, and in reality, these are people that are out filling in just like we do as directors. And they go out, fill in for their probation officers. They might have some duties. They're doing the same thing we are at tables like this, but they're filling in for their probation officers. They're doing lots and lots of things, and they're on call as much as anybody. And they're not here at this table. I'm actually not really, I mean, I'm representing them as a bunch of other people. But they are, actually would be three people if I know your structure right. In that world, it's not a huge number, but they are, it's that idea, you would not exclude, as I brought up, I think multiple times, you're not going to exclude a chief of police and say, oh, by the way, when you get promoted, you're kicked out of the system. That would be silly. I mean, I have a hard time with the fact that they stopped it at that level for corrections and said, oh, the next supervisor that is out in the field doesn't hit this plan anymore. You're okay with them being
Included.
included?
I don't judge. You guys made sure that the folks are represented. I am in the offices.
Paula, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm clearly I'm not okay with just adding a division. Right.
Legislative history did not include any of this kind of detail. Nobody got into these kinds of weeds. That's why there's the work group. So the legislative history is work group, you guys figure it out. So this is the group, but it sounds to me like the three of you probably have to talk, right? I mean, this work group probably can't resolve this issue with regard to three positions, right?
Sure. Well, see, and I thought we had a conversation, so that's the why, and I've not had other conversations with my HR and team about any other expansions here. So that, I mean, that's, you know, safe courtesy. I really.
Yeah, I think maybe looking at the position descriptions would be helpful, just because I haven't seen the managerial ones.
Regard to the positions here, so I'll wait to hear from you with an email and maybe copy Devin and Tammy Jo on that. And if you tell me three more, or one other position should be included. Do that in the bill that we do. That sound okay?
So, sure, I mean, that's great.
I'll send you an email.
Yeah, well, and see, so Devin is made, so not part of the group that we're talking about, right? So it's a different union, not at the table.
It's not easy. I don't think represented by any site.
MMA.
Listed on there, but I think they're the managerial.
Oh, they're in managerial. Okay.
And they're MCA members, and so Tammy Jo would know and work with them, and so if it's helpful, we can work to make sure that we have something in writing that explains what those 3 positions are, so that I can help identify things for folks. It's they're MCA members.
I'm fine. My folks are.
Well, I'll send the 2 of you an email and then you can respond back to me. On this topic, though, remember this huge procedure we put in place for dealing with new positions or new hires? I don't think this will play into it with new hires because you're not doing that assessment. New positions, is there a need similarly for some kind of process, or do you think we can count on that working okay over HR, DOC? Yeah, you know, because it's similar to the kind of, maybe you call it a corrections agent career 1, then you got 2. I mean, I've seen your list and they're long. And so, yeah, just, I don't know if there's a process that's needed to be sunk into the bill. Similar to what we have over in the correctional.
I don't know that it needs to be that detailed. So these classifications have existed for a very long time and haven't changed, unless you were considering new job classification that would be included. I think we even included one that isn't currently being used because we were just in case for the corrections agent one. Yeah.
Go down.
The corrections. I think the career one isn't currently being used, but the senior one is. So we even included it in there, just even if no one's in it, there's one comment currently.
Hasn't been abolished.
Right. I will say the costs aren't including those new other few positions, which would be more, their present value of benefits would be more expensive because they likely have higher salaries. And so I don't think it would have a significant impact, but I just share that because they weren't included in the actuarial calculation.
Why don't we take a break? And then we'll come back and we'll wrap up on this item. We're going to number 5. We'll take a break until 1:55.
That's kind of universal. Fire engine.
Right. All right, well, thanks, LPPR for the snacks. You're in LPPR.
Thank them. Yep.
All right, well, let's continue on with agenda item number 4. I think we are at a stopping point with the first part that Aaron presented, and then I thought we jumped to the last part of that before coming back to the probation officer memo. So Aaron, did you want to walk through the estimated cost for the sub plan? Why don't we start there and then we'll revert back to the previous item under that number.
Sure. So there's something in your packet with the blue bar at the top. Those are the MSRS, estimated costs. So our actuary, what we did was we took, I got this late on Friday. And our actuary I took those job codes that were in the definitions and sent them that information, and then they provided estimated costs associated with a sub-plan of the general plan with a couple different. So the left column is a general plan, just so that you have the frame of reference. So currently our general plan prospective multiplier is 1.9. We have a 1.75% COLA, full retirement age is 66. So the normal cost plus expenses is just over 10% of pay. There's a slight amortization of the unfunded because it's actuarial value. So we're technically 97% actuarial, but 100% market value. Our total required contributions are 1111, which is lucky. So yay for us. And then we're collecting 12.25% total. So between the employee and employer, we're collecting 6% employee, 6.25% employer. So we have a slight contribution sufficiency of just over 1%. This is going to be important in that currently we're collecting 12.25% total. PRA is collecting 14%. So these numbers look more expensive because our contributions are lower today than they would be in this proposed sub-plan. So the first V1, sub-plan V1 is the one that is preferred by the stakeholders. The 2% multiplier with a 1.75% full retirement age. So the total cost, normal cost plus expenses is 18.27% pay. So the difference in contributions would be 6% of pay for those folks to have that feature, and that's prospective going forward. And then I just put this, so because you are doing a lot of comparisons to the PRA, if you reduce that by 1.75%, it'd be closer to 4% of pay. So it looks more expensive. It is slightly more expensive than PRAs, but part of it is just related to the contributions. The 1A is that same calculation, but instead of doing a 2% multiplier at 1.9, this was something that I calculated based on, we just switched to 1.9% in our general plan, which is about 1% of pay. So I just reduced the cost by about 0.5% of pay using that reasoning. So it'd be closer to 5.5. The version 2 in the green are those same provisions, but at age 62. So 4 years earlier than 66. And that's closer to 4.82% or 4.32%, depending on the multiplier. That is kind of an explanation of our costs and kind of the reasons.
After it says $9 value.
No, but I can do the calculation real quick. Sorry, my computer, of course, is like spinning. I can get you the number. Questions?
Thank you, Aaron, for putting that together. It's really helpful. So why don't we then, we're gonna jump back just one bullet point under number 4. To have the probation officer stakeholders represent their memo. There's someone who's going to be great, Nicole. Thank you for putting all this down.
Absolutely. Thank you to
A lot of work.
the whole group. I honestly, I'm just the spokesperson. They did all the work. So I'm not gonna read the memo to you word for word, but what we did is, based on when Susan sent out a memo, we kind of used that as a framework, and we wanted to make sure that everyone understood our guiding principles, what we are doing, what our hopes are, and, understanding that we're trying to let go of things that we know are getting in the way of us moving forward. So this is our good faith effort to say, this is where we're at. These are the things that we believe we can compromise on, and while keeping in mind the guiding principles and what we're hoping to achieve. That's my little intro. So the key priorities for us continue to be a plan that acknowledges hard work that agents do, that everyone who's working in probation does. We still want to figure out a way to remedy the inequity in the retirement age and benefits afforded to other public safety. We have the word adjacent in here. I would say continuum jobs. And considers transition funding for probation officers who have spent their entire career without reasonable retirement benefits compared to others. So we looked at things that have already been decided on, the structure of the plan, eligibility, vesting requirements, normal retirement ages, and again, 60 is the age that we are targeting. Disability pension benefit, we agreed that that would be the same as a general plan. Obviously, we're dealing with a group of people who a large majority of them won't have worked at this age, but we also understand that our claims hadn't been a high number, and we recognize that, and we don't want to penalize employers because that could be expensive. Surviving spouse and child coverage, same as general plan. Refund contributions or buying back a refund would be the same as the general plan. Getting to the new items. The employee contribution, we're looking at a 3% increase in both plans. Under the employer contribution, the MSRS, the employer contribution would not increase from the general plan rate. Now, given the numbers that Erin is setting out there, you can see that these are our guiding principles. We know this is what we would like to target. We know that at this point, we may not get to all of them. Para, the employer contribution rate would not increase from the current general plan rate of 7.5, but the additional 1% in the 7.5, which expires when the general plan reaches 98%, would not expire. That would be what we would consider a 1% contribution from the employers. Past service, request the adoption of the following principles. These are our guiding principles that we are dug in on at this point, and we're hoping that this group can recognize that these are important to us. Recognize longstanding service as a part of the transition to a new pension plan. Acknowledge past service by letting individuals closer to retirement make up for fewer years paid into a new plan. An example of that would be someone who is 58 in 2027. They're only going to have 2 years to put into that plan, and they're going to face a reduction in the old plan, and that's a financial hardship to some extent on all the years of public service that they have completed thus far. Allow employees to contribute pre-tax income / deferred compensation to pay for past service. Allow for transition aid from the state to cover a portion of past service. Obviously, that's to be determined, and anyone who has any pull, we would love that if that was a large sum. Actuarial equivalent plus $250 administration fee to be applied for the purchase if a member chooses to purchase. Early retirement ages. We looked at 50, 55 in there. Right now, we're listing between 50 to 55. We're open to the plan recommendations on that. Post-retirement COLA is 1.75 until 98% funded and then 2%. We are trying to be mindful of the people that come after us. And at what point can we increase that when that fund is a little more solid? And then the opportunity to opt out of the new plan, a one-time election to opt out within 60 days of the start of the new plan. Only current members obviously can opt out. Because of rule of 90 and then the gap now between, we have a group of people who they're doing a lot of math trying to figure out, does this new plan harm them or not? Is it better for them to go? And so having that opt-out option is really the right thing to do for them. Combined service annuities, mixed service approach and combined service approach. And then we looked at a multiplier of 2% for both MSRS and para. I would stand for questions and look for support from everyone who is there during these conversations.
Questions, comments?
I'm just gonna point out that the option to opt out is problematic from what we have been given. Advice that we have been given from our tax council. So in order to achieve that, you have to set up the contribution for the pre-tax contribution is the same. And then anything additional will be post-tax, which does get.
But it's possible.
But that applies like going forward for everyone's contributions, you're going to have contributions that are done on a pre-tax level and a post-tax, like that's how you're setting up the plan. So it's significant. And it's complicated, and I think the porters might note that the HR payroll tax thing might be an issue.
It's an IRS requirement, not the para thing. It's about keeping a tax qualified plan. It's related to whether a plan is optional like plan versus mandatory. So that's where our limitation is, the advice from our.
And MSRS's stance on that is what?
I haven't talked to the tax, so I suspect it'll be the same. I know that it works that way for our classified and general plan. They have the contributions for the employee have to be the same. Because there's an election between the two.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, so that if it were an option, there would be every member participating forever would have this split on their content. It's not something that just impacts the person who opts themselves out.
I believe so. I can double check with Miller on that, but I believe the plan itself is set up to way in order to allow that option.
Yeah, we'd love to see something from them or something from someone, a legal determination.
And then here.
Just briefly, do those kind of parameters change if the legislature was written such that there's a one-time option out for X ages or something like that?
I think it's the same, as long as the employee contribution is different for current members, there is not the option for an election. If the pre-tax contribution remains the same, and then your post-tax, like you have post-tax contribution increase, then you're allowed an election.
So if there's election for any member in the entire group, then it would have to be for. There's.
Did you have something on that point?
Well, I do, and I think if it's here. You guys can tax. Yeah. Any option would send the actuaries back to the drawing board, say, well, we'd have to consider who's opting in, who's opting out, and the cost ramifications of that would probably be those that it's more favorable to stay in the plan. Well, we'd have to consider the cost of that too. So that's the impact there.
I'm just going to add that I think this is primarily a concern for our group for just what was said for a very few people who are nearing retirement. So I don't think that the amount of people. So I don't.
And they didn't make the rule of 90.
So if you drafted it where it was required that they would not be in the new plan, that's fine.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
I was just gonna follow up. I think David asked a similar question. Want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this. If we gave an opportunity to opt out, from what Aaron, you're saying, is that every new employee would have to have a split in terms of contributions, pre and post tax. Or, sorry, Amy.
Yes, it's my understanding that in order to have the opt-out for current members, the new plan has to be set up where the employee pre-tax contribution is the same.
Yeah.
And then anything additional is post-tax.
Tammy Jo.
Just, and I'm just trying to, I know this is complicating this a little bit more, but the biggest issue for this is there is some individuals that are within a year of retirement. And it really would complicate their retirement, the fact that just the date, right, there, and so forth. If there would there be a way to have an, for that specific group saying, if you are within a year of retirement, you can opt out? That
I
free,
have to go back and talk to you.
because then we're not trying to, I mean, we're not trying to, it's not the whole group. It literally is a group of people that are super close, like 5 people or 6 people that are so close to retirement that it's really gonna complicate their situation when they, if this goes into effect right before their retirement.
Instead of having an election, would it be possible to set a date where if your years of service started on or after a set date, that you would go into the new plan, and if it was before, you would stay in the old one? Would that be a way to avoid an election and just give a bright, clear line as to who's in and who's out?
I can go back to ISO. What I'm hearing from the group is that there's an understanding that for current membership, having an election is problematic, right? And now the issue that we're trying to solve is that there is a group of people within a year or two of retirement from when the new plan is started, that we just don't want them in the new plan. They don't want.
Amy, I think, and I don't want to speak for anybody else in the group. I think the bigger concern is, I don't think anybody here wants to have employees paying into their pension post-tax. I think we want to make sure that everybody understands that their contribution is tax deductible. That's also a benefit to members. And it's a big affordability challenge if the new contributions are going to be post-tax. And then I think you're correct on the other part. If there's a way to just set a date, if that's preferable, if people who are close to retirement, but that's going to be everybody.
Yeah.
So it'll be, if it's January 1 of whatever year, whatever the date is. And I think if maybe at some point, I don't know if there's a way for the employee groups to talk with their members to figure out what those start dates are, to make sure that you don't inadvertently capture or exclude.
I think there might be something there, and I'm not committing to it, but there might be something there because there's not an option, right? Because what we run into is we're allowing a second election, and that's the issue. But if it's mandatory that like everyone in that group is excluded, maybe that gets around it. I'm not committing to it. I will go talk to Iceler again. And ask them these questions about if there's a way to like prevent a group, the entire group to out.
It would mirror when Rule of 90 was sunsetted. We set a date where if you didn't begin service by a specific date, then you did not get it. And if you did, and if you happen to begin the day before that date, good for you, I guess.
I can go back and talk to Iceler.
So if you could do that, you could also do a session law that lists everybody who wants to elect out, and the legislature's got to make the call.
Yeah, it's not a choice of the. Yeah.
Things that opt out.
Mandatory.
They would come in and tell the legislature, I don't want to be in the plan, and then we write a session law. But
it'd be everyone in that group though.
Because we do special bills all the time.
I have to ask Iceler on that. If you can do it like.
Any other questions?
Sure. Where are we hoping to get the supplemental funding, legislature or?
Well, I checked with the tooth fairy and he said no. Yes, obviously we would hope that the legislature would recognize this. They recognize the fact that this group needs a pension carve out for us enough to assign a work group for it and move it forward. So we would hope that some funds are found. Obviously, for me, I have to have a little hope because when Paris says numbers that are really high, that kind of dashes my hope. So I'm hanging on to the legislature at this point.
I only bring it up, do we have a backup plan then if that funding doesn't become available, so it doesn't sink it? We might have an amendment to the overall bill, so if that provision isn't adopted by the commission, then the rest of it still goes forward. I'm a little experienced down there in St. Paul, and I just hate to see a poison pill added that underlines all the work that this group is putting in to get to where they are right now. So that's kind of a question and a recommendation to discuss that amongst yourself, that if the stars don't align and there's that funding available, that we have another vehicle to go forward. I kind of look at it simplistically. This is what we want. This is what it costs. Shoes cost $2. Well, we have to come up with $2 or we don't get the new pair of shoes. What are your respective groups going to contribute as employees? Fortunately, from what I'm seeing, I think we're going to have to continue to tweak that and dial that, right? Certainly I understand the strong desire to retire at 60, having retired from the state patrol plan, but can't, but if we can make any improvement at all, I look at it as a victory. Maybe that's too simplistic. If you can knock 66 to 62.5 or to 63, it's better than what we have today. And as things improve from my time being involved with pensions, we're continually reevaluating, continually looking at it as funding improves. You know, like I heard the term 98% funding. I would say, I would change that to 100 because it seems like we have a tendency to have discussions about making changes when we get to 100% than we do with my O2 on the subject.
So in response to that, according to our membership, 60 is the age that we are targeting. We are willing to look at changes in other areas to adjust that. As for the funding piece, coming from the legislature or the tooth fairy, I'm not giving up on that. That's just a comment to allow us that if that funding does come, we're not banking on that, but saying that we want it built into the bill that if there is funding available, that can be pulled in. If we can identify a source for that can be included and part of it. But we understand we also have to be realistic and flexible.
Amy Jo.
And I guess maybe to clarify that, that's partly why we're trying to build a plan. And then the funding we're really looking for is for that past credit service. You know, so that we can find ways of partial funding and then maybe partially buyback, or we want to build a plan that's viable. And then have that past service credit as our priority, but how do we get funding for that and then build a way to buy back that past service credit. But the plan itself is a little separate.
And to clarify one item too, this was before Para brought this is how much us leaving is going to cost. So our numbers were in line with what was being presented prior to that PowerPoint that then came out with these huge numbers.
So appreciate your comments.
Go ahead, Susan. So looking at what you are seeking here and comparing it to Aaron's chart. Aaron, I'm coming up with a 6.02% additional employee contribution. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is that something that you guys are okay with? Or whoever?
It's well before we got the numbers from the GRS.
So there's a lot more that needs to be talked about here. Yeah, 6.02.
Substantial.
Okay, yeah, so lots to be said. We're gonna have to have a meeting. Okay.
And just a question for the other stakeholders in the room on the employee side, are the 911 telecommunicators leaning into this proposal, or is it new to you, something you need to bring back?
Not new to me or to Mike, because we spoke to Eric, last week, about this, and I still think the 3% is stretch. I was gonna go 2%. Like everybody, the additional 5, we just can't ask that of our people. I mean, I don't even know what they're gonna get for raises this year, if anything. And then, of course, we have to contribute that 0.44 to the new sick leave stuff. So I'm very concerned, but I'm trying to figure out, we do need to get it off the ground. I agree with Mike that things then can turn around and look better. So I'm committed to getting something, to the heads. But some of these numbers are.
Madam Chair, I agree. I won't kill the messenger. Director Leonard, she's just given us the data that we asked for. But I can say without hesitation, if I was to assemble a group of, for example, state dispatchers conference call and say, how do you feel about a contribution of an additional 4%? You know how that's going to go. So that's why I threw out there is a willingness. We're not going to let perfect way of good, right? If we can get to good and we can get agreement, and even if we have to dial back, and again, I'm looking at it, you know, not being a telecommunicator, so I guess it's kind of easy for me to say, well, 62.5 or 63 is better than 66, but I think in a sense, you have to determine what that number is. Is it 2? And then we're from there. And that's what we have to do, because the pair of those shoes is what it is. And there's a willingness from our group, even if you know, you have to do a sub-plan within a sub-plan. I don't know if Director Leonard can do that. If the telecommunicators were only willing to do 2%, and then the probation group that represents the state are willing to do 3%, is that a possibility?
Yes, we could do separate sub-plans.
The reason I bring that up is I don't want to hurt this group. I don't want this group to be hurt. There might be a different path forward that's agreeable but accomplishes. Obviously, if the legislature was kind enough to give us money, and without hesitation, I would say me too, right? And I would imagine we would have to determine how we allocate that money based on the numbers and the history. And I'm looking at Doug and Aaron, because obviously there was money allocated for MSR state pro plan and ERA. And we came to an agreement, well, this group gets this much of that money based on, was it liability stuff or? If they were to provide funding, that's, my group would just say we need to figure out a way that's allocated. So no one group benefits greater than the other. We know what we have to work with. But again, I would not want high money coming from the legislature to the success of this, because obviously all of us have seen the future projections, and I think there's going to be a real reluctance to open up the state big changes.
Go ahead.
Clarifying question, you know, we had left it open, the early retirement age of 55 or 50 or whatnot. And I think my understanding from Para is that it, I just want to check this out from the employer side, if there's changed. If you use that actuarial equivalence, does it make any difference from a financial standpoint from Para's perspective, or is it one from the employer side of picking 50 or 55 or 52 or?
No, it doesn't really matter. See, I do equivalent. No significant difference.
So just to, it doesn't make the plan healthier to go 55 instead of 50. There's just no difference.
No, it's actually.
And so, if there isn't an alteration from the financial side from para, and once we hear from employers, they see that the advantage or disadvantage, then the only thing I could think of that would be otherwise an issue is if somehow legislatively there was a concern about that. Otherwise, if there's really no financial difference in that, seems to me that would be a nice thing to extend, that there might be a very few amount of people that based on, hey, all of a sudden they just had it, they can't do this work anymore, or some other life circumstance pops up, and they're just too burned out or something. Seems like if there's no harm, then I think there's 50 would be fine. I know our group is wide open to reason, again, the bill, wanting to see a bill go through is the primary objective.
Yeah, just a question. So Doug and Amy, looking at the probation and probation officer's proposal, looking at the flyer and all that, is 3% gonna do it? Or is 3% enough? I thought it was higher than that. They have a age 60 normal retirement age and a 2%. Recall what that amount was? Get a copy on there. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, please, I didn't bring it along, so.
Go with the 1.75% retirement increase. And, 2%. Matrix we presented last week, that's the 9.39%. Cost, which is less than 3% more than the current.
And I'm confused, so then this, the 5% that you talked about with the differential to make up that $33 million deficit is an addition to what you're talking about, correct?
It's an addition, but I do want to follow up on that because on the withdrawal liability, I think the way that discussion came to end was a focus on employees paying 5%. Which early in that presentation was a development of a different number. Which is the $33 million cost. That 33 million could be spread over a period of time. And one potential way of paying for that would be to split the employer fixed amount between the two plans. So employers aren't paying more, there's some of it goes to the general plan, some of it goes to the, but when it gets down to 33 million spread over 15 years, it's only 1.5% of pay. So that's a different way of doing it. It's not as the owner said, it's really.
Doug, so if we kick that at 2048, like a lot of the funds use, seems to be the popular date, what does that change to them as a percentage of pay ball?
I'm guessing one.
Three-year mortgage versus the 15, that's the way I look at it.
I know that the legislature did pass the methodology for tracing costs at the end.
Is that kind of ballpark 15 years?
15 years. I think it'd be looking at a 15-year methodology and call for it. Based on a 15-year amortization, it's about 1.5%. So follow that example that I was talking about, that took the 7.5% employer piece, just directed 1.5 to the general plan, remaining 6 to the, and that's one way of paying for it, but it's not directly on the. Also heard talk about asking the legislature for
last session, we did expand 15-year to another 2048 for the TRA. Teacher benefit improvements, so there is precedent. I'll go on to 2048 on. If, you know, not good policy, but it is something. to do.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Have to get through Doug and his board first, right?
I do need to just clarify, I think Dar was joking, but I want to make sure I understand that the legislature are the people who are going to make this decision. And Para gets input, but, okay, I just want to make sure that we're all,
They listen to them.
right, right, but we're all on the same page, that the legislature makes these decisions and Para provides input to it and guidance of best practice. But
And to be clear, I mean, legislatively, it could be written up, this could be written up as two. Well, I know you said you could put options up there too, which is a different, another layer of variation, but this really could be, it could be para probation, para 911, MSRS probation, MSRS 911. There could be four pieces as well as potential other options legislatively a little bit.
So MSR sub-plans is pretty easy one, and Aaron has just said they don't have a problem with that. The question would be, would Para accept two, just one? The bill can do that. And then sort of gauging what the objection would be from Para to that. We could certainly have no problem with offering that to the commission, for sure, but I don't know how Para feels about two plans.
we have to think about that.
We want to note that all the cost numbers have been developed on a combined group. It doesn't necessarily have the same demographic makeup, or more importantly, the same set of assumptions that would apply. So if we're starting to talk about separating into two different plans for two different groups, we need to take a close look at those assumptions, particularly the termination assumption, which is something we talked about on an earlier, before our actuary presented, we talked about different groups, different assumptions, different impacts. So all of these numbers are blended, those groups, we're talking with different groups. We're going to get different.
When the actuary prepared their report, did they have the 911 dispatchers information? It was just probation's numbers though, right?
Whatever HR's contributed.
Okay.
And I think you said 800 folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have a lower age. I did lower years of service.
Was there any input from the counties in terms of that early age of? Is there thoughts?
50 or 55.
50 or 55?
Just on that.
Or other?
Well, yeah, well, first I want to thank you. I know I've talked to Nicole and Tammy Jo outside of this group too, and I appreciate that. I think we're still all aligned of trying to figure out what a path looks like and how it get there. So I appreciate the specificity on what you want that plan to look like. The 50-55, Jim, that is a conversation that wasn't the one thing that we looked at. Two things that we've been looking at on this plan are the three things. So of course, the contribution rates for everyone. With a multiplier and the what's the last one? Age of retirement. So we think that multiplier and the age of retirement has the biggest dial up, dial down pressures. What I'm intrigued by is that, you know, for future conversation, when we get to this matrix, maybe my assumption on the multiplier versus age of retirement is totally off on what that actually gets us. But I still think, to Dar's point, at a certain point, we're balancing take-home pay for employees versus the benefit they're getting. And what's that criteria or number that you're really wanting to go to? This plan is what, 3% roughly? Changes with the state a little bit. Is your goal, is that your cap at how high you're willing to go, or is it more like 2.5 or 2? And then what do we do with those dial ups or dial downs to get to that? And so the early retirement thing, Jim, is I think lower on our list of things. I will say that as a philosophical point, when you were saying that we want to provide benefits for folks who are leaving earlier, if they put in that time, I think that is something that the legislature will have opinions on as well, about what retirement plans are kind of set up to do and what they're trying to encourage benefits for. I'd be curious, it still has a cost. We might be paying for it within that rate to make sure that it fits the actuarial rates of assumption for what that benefit costs, but it's still costing you something as part of that percentage. I just don't know how much it is of that. So if that's on what I'm hearing you say on all these things is age of retirement is your biggest priority. Past service credit is falling in kind of second. And then the third bucket is more of the early retirement and the multiplier. Is that fair of how I'm hearing it, at least being presented? If I were to put those into those 3 buckets of priorities for your group, and Dar, I know that you have your group too, but.
So the I would say the age of retirement and past service credit are neck and neck.
They are. Okay.
But yes. Otherwise, you're.
And that early age can go way down on that. We really don't have a preference between 50 and 55 at this point.
Yeah.
The past service credit, is that an opportunity to purchase, or is that getting funded and baked into?
All of the above, either or.
Realistically, what we can do.
Whatever can help our members be able to be recognized for some of that service, and not that they're not recognized, but be able to financially access that without a huge reduction. See, you've taught me to not say penalties, maybe. But to be able to do that so that, because as we've said, there is this group of people who didn't get recognized to enroll in 90 and is now going to somehow take on the funding for us, this plan being created, whether it's through the employer split. Now we're hearing that's a possibility, but so that group is taking hits. And so we need to figure out, without past service of any kind, it's really inequity being placed upon them. And so that's that piece, that dance we're doing. Jim?
Really, if we think about it, it makes all the sense in the world where State Patrol, police and fire, corrections, and stuff in that public safety realm have a reasonable retirement for the type of work. And you've got the general plan. We're really trying to position, we're trying to do 2 things. We're trying to position ourselves, recognizing that we do work in public safety. When we put on the bulletproof vest, go out in the communities, when we're dealing with these things that hit the paper and stuff, that we should be creating that sweet spot in the middle on the public safety continuum, and it should be less than what police and fire and corrections have, but needs to be there for the future for everyone going forward. That's the priority, and then the other priority is that those who are doing it get something, get some way. That transition aid is a word that's coming from our group, is transition aid, to help recognize those who've been carrying those years. And then my comments specifically about the early retirement age, that's really at the bottom of our list. But if it's no extra cost, no issue, if it doesn't harm the ability for it, I mean, that's just be aware of it and see what can be done.
Just a comment, if we had a younger workforce, I think that past service credit, what I was thinking, would be, I think our average age 43 or 44. There's a lot of people in our field in that circumstance, a lot. So that's why it's kind of neck and neck with the age of retirement.
Tammy Jo.
And I know I've said this like 2 or 3 times in our meetings, and I'm just gonna say it again, everybody. But just reminding everybody that this is that gap generation of the fact that because of Rule 90, there's very few probation officers out there that have ever worked 66. And then it's generally a choice, right? This is gonna be, this group that we're talking about will be the first group that's gonna be out there at 64, 65. If we don't get this past the finish line, they're the ones that we're gonna be dealing with workman's comp issues or the different things from an employer standpoint. Because of the fact they're going out and doing home visits, they're going out and doing the apprehension and detention orders and all of the different things that we do at a different age than we've ever seen. And that is gonna have an impact on what happens in our field. And so I think it's something to keep in mind that if we don't have something addressing that past service credit, even if the age of 60 is there, you're not gonna see our generation retire because they're just not gonna be able to, because there isn't any, the funding isn't gonna be there for that.
Real quick, if I can.
Yeah, Matt.
I appreciate these moments to have this dialogue of understanding too, because I don't think on the matrix of kind of what the options are. I think there's more alignment and understanding of each other's perspectives than the other two. I think there's 3 buckets that we're facing. Buckets of what the plan looks like. The bucket of past service, which I would separate that too, because I think that's a sticky one that we're gonna have to kind of get through on. And then the third one with the withdrawal liability. But on this first bucket of what the plan looks like, what's the vesting, what's the multiplier, the COLAs, I think that there's general kind of movement towards a direction of what this could be. I would be curious when we get to the matrix on the para-tentative proposal based on what you presented to us, because there is significant cost savings for the employee contribution rate on that. And to me, I'm looking at it, I'm only seeing basically the multiplier being the thing that goes down a little bit. But to Dar's point of the purchasing power of take home, that's a 1.64% increase to retire at 60. That's a big deal. To Ladou's point earlier, that seems like a victory. So I'd be curious about your take when you saw that either today or offline or after the meeting.
And you're talking the green one when you're looking at.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a lot of para versus, so, I would, this is not a terrible plan for our group. We have discussed it, it's very similar to what we're discussing. But again, I think what we're also still looking at is this doesn't have past service. And is that 5% for the unfunded liability going to fall on us? And so those are questions that are still out there. 5%, right?
Well, or 33 million.
Yeah.
We have to still understand like that, well, the realization we gave the introduction to drawing. It is not, the number has not been defined, the methodology of it has not been defined. So there's still ways to honor the principle of it, right? Similar to when you're asking us to honor the principle of past service, right? So I think that there are ways to honor the principle of the withdrawal liability, but still figure out what is the best way to go forward on that. But it could be the 5%, it could be the 33 million, it could be different ways of getting that money. There's still options on the table. So again, stress, this was an introduction to the conversation.
Right, just looking at the time a little bit, I know that Doug and Aaron need to leave at about 3:30. You need to be somewhere by 3:00. They need to be there by 8:00. Doug, how would you like to proceed? Do you want to do yours next time or?
I think they're pretty quick.
Okay, let's go. Let's do jump into number 5 then and have Dr. present on comparison.
It's just the 1-page chart. This was put together for, it was very specific to the information that either they've seen it before or to give them a sense of where this is at the moment.
So it's really very specific to them. So the general plan cost, contribution rates, left-hand column. The second column was the bill from the last session, the cost that we talked about at that time. At that time, we talked to the board a lot about the opposition to how the past service cost was allocated. So we showed them that if the past service cost was split so that it does not apply to future hires, it only applied to the current members of that group. And they paid for it over 15 years. How much would they need to pay for that? So that's what the 6.11% for the past service cost piece is. So that was the distinction in that second and third group. It's just information we were giving our board to show different ways how past service could be attributed to the members. Second to the right, called initial new plan cost study. So that was the cost study that GRS formed and was presented to our board and was presented to this group. That was based on parameters down at the bottom, multiplier, post-term increases, age 60, all based on input from Senator Seeberger and stakeholder members. The tentative proposal A. Please don't read too much into the wording. We had to put some words on it. This was could go on a DARS 2% number. We went with the 2%. We went to the matrix of options that we looked at before and saw that there was an answer there for under 2% is a 1.9% multiplier, age 60 unreduced, and the full formula that matches the current general plan. That's where that 1.64 came. So that's what we gave to the board. I think this stuff has been mapped, some of it, onto the LCPR paragraph. The one on the far right of the screen is what it's the last column. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the far right column here is shown in the green shading on the S. That's it. This is just information for the board. They had a board workshop. We tried to update them on progress of the group and also tried to get them to prepare for potential decision for them whether to support or oppose or do whatever when they meet in December. They'll get attention.
I know the group, because I watched the video, already decided on vesting. Is there a savings to the fund that could help with some of these numbers if you went to like a graduated system like P&F, like 10%, right? After 5 years, you're 50% vested. After 10, you're 100, or is the juice not worth the squeezing?
I don't think it was very significant. There was some change in their general plan from 5 years to 3 years a few years ago. That didn't really have much cost to it.
Karen, and you guys, did you come back with a number, how many people quit and refund their money?
In the assumptions or in the actual?
Last meeting, you said you couldn't make an assumption. Look.
I have a chart. We'll look at it. So I don't know off the top of my head. And I know they actually made some assumptions based on the existing.
both want to send that info to Lena and then we'll put it out to the group. Just okay for your crowd as well.
We'll do it.
Yeah, the question.
I don't know if we can get the refunds. That might be hard for us, particularly for like particular memberships and
Whatever you get.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is?
our system's a little volunteer.
Tammy Jo, I have a question. So, I mean, when we're looking at this, the middle round one looks pretty awesome in a lot of ways, but obviously it would be very cost prohibitive in some ways at the same time. If we were able to get funding in the legislature, how would we be able to reduce that? I mean, what would be a way, I'm just asking the question for people. This, the middle one, blue, I'm asking if there's somebody else smarter than me to tell me if we were able to get funding, how would that be applied to that, right? Would there be a way to reduce that cost?
Not to interrupt you, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't know if I'm even asking it right. I'm just trying to figure out how do you reduce that?
I think the parent board position is gonna be still pretty clear. The view we would like to be opposed, because even within reducing that contribution period to 15 years, you still have big winners and big losers. So I don't know if the blue was not meant to be a proposal. It was meant to capture information that has been given during the assessment in one.
I want to know what percent of the is for this group. Because it's going to come down to millions with the legislature, like percent of pay, who cares? They don't know. They want to know dollars. So we'll have to eventually, I think, we're going to talk about trying to come up with money. We need to, how many million we're talking about.
We do know how many are in each group. At least for the probation officers, we don't for probably 911 dispatchers, but we do have a graph that tells us kind of how many people are in each age group, but probably not.
Yeah, I mean, we have information on how much service folks have. I will say, because I spent enough time talking to Amy, that we don't necessarily know exactly how much all of those years are doing what job, so we'd have to look into that more. We just know how long someone's paid into parent general or MSRS general, because of job codes, it might be easier to track in MSRS. I will remind my probation friends and folks who followed the 6035 bill from last session. Two columns in the middle, this was that O'Driscoll amendment that came up at the end of session. Where he was saying this is really expensive, and if we put it just on the new folks, it would be even that much more expensive. So I don't think that this is something that we can get excited about. This has already been told no on this previously. So I think it's just a demonstration of what that cost is.
We see 14.02. That's what the current members would pay in going forward. And so I'm just wondering if 1% of pay for this group is $10 million, you can at least quantify what we're talking about if they were.
Yeah, I can talk to Doug about that. I would say with that 14% pay, you're still gonna have people who are big losers in there who are paying 14% pay for like 1 year. Or service, Susan, I can talk. So our board is still gonna have an issue with that intergenerational and equity in that. Right, because that 14% of pay is being assessed to someone that might have a day of service based on the new plan. So as Courtney said, it's information that was presented during session, just all in one spot for the board to consider. And I can talk to Doug about percentage pay, because I understand for the past service conversation, it's helpful for you guys to know the percent of pay, but just to know like that kind of plan proposal would be still very concerning to me.
Other thing that would be helpful if we're talking about dollars is getting an average of how much past service cost we're talking about. You know, because we were seeing numbers like 250,000 for one person. How in the world you guys think you're going to be able to pay for this? I mean, the most we got out of the legislature that was just money hanging out there was a few years ago. There was 5 million, and that went to the volunteer firefighters. But I mean, we've had 1 million hanging out there for the IRAP, the TRA past service costs, but to think you're gonna, I mean, we gotta know numbers at some point, and averages are great. If there's a way to come up with how much past service we're talking about on average, and then as applied to, you know, average pay, and then just any kind of ballpark. Because if we're talking 100 million, and we put this in the bill, I don't think you guys have a plan, right? So, it would be good to have magnitude dollars here.
And we're not, I don't think, we're not trying to be ridiculous. We understand we're not getting all of our service credit. I've cried on my pillow about that already. But what we want to make sure of is if there is a way for people to not have to take money out of their deferred comp that they've already earned to pay so that they can access their new plan and still retire while taking a reduction, and I'm gonna call it a penalty now. That's what we're aiming for, is there a road to figure out a way that we can purchase service credit through deferred comp, maybe have a match or something. That's what we're just trying to figure out. Is there a happy medium of, if I buy 2 years, is there a way to fund 2 years match or something like that? We're trying to be realistic about it, but it's also looking at walking away from, it would be very hard for me to vote and say, heck yeah, tentative A looks great. I'll walk away without any past service built in or the ability to get it. That's 30 years of work that I'm gonna take a penalty on. That's a hard pill to swallow.
And
I'm sorry, reduction.
yeah, and it's not just us, that would be pretty much, like I said, pretty much anybody at that age, they're not gonna be able to afford the 60.
Why don't you go with mixed service, like, all right. You would take the reduction,
Right. And we've talked about that.
let's go for it.
What did you say?
I just have to comment on that, and Susan, Doug's not here, that would be something that we would probably have concerns that only a plan of all of our plans can do, right? So I think that may be concerning for our board to have only one plan have access to that feature. And there's a lot of arguments in our general plan that we have a lot of other members who do public works, who do other jobs that are hard, that they would then have access to mixed service and would only have access to combined service. So I think if we're gonna have that conversation about mixed service, we've got to talk about all plans having mixed and not just one plan.
Tanya and then Jen.
And with respect to the public works on the fields, it is not correct. It's not the field that we look at. I have asked a question of probation for Red County. I have ISRAs that are in their 60s chasing people out. Studies, it is very challenging. To the point where we have shootouts, agents are standing. It is just not the same. So I respect any worker, what they do. There's a reason why this Barbara is here. So the reason why and progression. If I wasn't working in this field, and I get everybody wants it. But I want to with respect this field that it deserves. And so while I can understand. It's been 30 plus years that they've been trying to get something. Now, the conversation about the generational inequity is challenging. Well, I'm literally paying for people that have different benefits than I. That's the nature of me. I want as many benefits for employees as possible. To me, this is retention. We have agents that can't do it. I cannot be in the field and do this any longer. Safety of my mental health and my. It's a little different. And so again, much respect to all them, I just want to focus on, they did the work that we're working on in this field, deserve to carve out. Let's agree. We're just recognizing the hard work of those folks working in this field. It is very challenging. And I want everyone else that's included in this plan. But I don't want to lose sight of what that challenge looks like as opposed to in the nurse. And we have to look at carve out. Carve out, because I'm just having a conversation with them. I don't know if this makes. That you just, someone go with it. I just know that it's planned, you folks that do this work. And I've been doing this work decades, and I'm only 27 years.
My comments were not intended.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that. Well, I understand. I just want to make sure that.
And I understand yours. I know our board has a plan of 150,000 active members that we're looking at. And there are challenges throughout that workforce. And that would be something that they have to look at, is that they're creating a plan that has access to a different type of benefit than all of our other plans do. That is something that the board as a policy is gonna have to consider.
Is there any kind of plans?
There are different, like combined services across the statewide plans. The only plan that has mixed service is, I'm gonna rely on Susan to fact check me if I'm wrong, or Jenkins, MSRS, general and correctional. That's the only combo that can have mixed service. It's not afforded to the state patrol. It's not afforded to ENF, the teacher's retirement, or general, correctional, correctional. So it is a very unique, not large group.
And there was a reason why.
I have no idea.
I'm saying there's a reason why they decided to move this particular plan or this fire and so on. So what I'm asking is kind of that consideration conversation. Whatever that reason is, it's obviously been done before for this. And you know, public safety adjacent. Character to just very much of like.
The why kind of keeps coming up in these kind of funny ways in our discussions, and I think, and I understand if I think about the county's perspective or Paris perspective, others, that it's, you know, the concern is if you do something that is that create this open-ended thing, and I just, again, for anybody who's done the work, and I imagine for 911 as well, you know, that the weight of carrying that for so many years. I mean, or for probation to work with a completely justice involved group of population of people. The amount of repetitions day in and day out, and the amounts of moments of extreme risk that, you know, that, I mean, that's kind of what we felt like we were kind of answering over the last 2 years of testifying, was the why. So just that, to me, it's a very clear line that should be able to be related to employer and to the legislature, that why probation and 911 would be, it would make sense to do something different for in our case, in our situation. And then back to the intergenerational equity piece. It just continues to feel, I mean, it's about fairness, and so when you working in this field, you are looking for fairness, and that's what you're trying to do throughout today. So we want fairness amongst all age groups. And when we keep seeing some of the logistics of this stuff, younger or yet to be hired probation officers would get a benefit to a plan that's created when they come, and they know all their years that they work, that this is there. That's an actual structured benefit of the plan is created, that it's been built. You know, that's a benefit of building it. Then there's the payment of it. And really, if there is the fully funded, and then there's a drop that happens later on, long after any of us who are working in this field are gone or something. I mean, that's a future benefit that this group, another piece of this, that the mid and further on age group probation staff would not get. And so I feel like, sometimes I've wondered about, is there a fairness piece that blends it? If we understand, would one not take some of those numbers and spread it out over the past service a little bit, but across the whole group, because they're recognizing that there is a benefit, and there would be a future drop in the rates that people would pay, a nominal amount. And those are just a few random thoughts.
Yeah, my comment or question is, how would we certify that? you know, taking myself, for example, I've been doing 911 for 32 years, but 14 of those was at Minneapolis. You'd have to certify my employment through them. And 18 with the Washington County Sheriff's Office. How would we find all this mixed people? And if somebody had 15 years in and stopped doing it, would we go find that person and give them 15 years in the new plan? So I think it opens a huge bag of how, I don't know how to accomplish.
So the one way we did it was to determine how much you want by way of your service and then get an actual calculation done. I'll tell you 200,000. And then there was a fund that was set up. It got to a lot more than that, but then every time an employee came in and bought a service, they got this chunk of money, and I think the max there was $10,000. That's the problem here, is that the dollars are so huge, and there's just not going to be enough to go around. So if someone could get that amount of money from the state, from the trust fund established, but so you didn't have to identify. You came in and said, I want 5 years. This is where I worked. You know, you got a calculation, paid money, and then
Number that they showed on the diagram for somebody my age, 57 years old, 32 years of service, that was $700,000. Settle, and nobody's coming up with $700,000 for Dartmouth County. Pretty sure.
It looks like we have a few more presentations left, or at least 2, right?
we don't have to do those. Actually, I think they were to try to get your group moving on it, so I don't think there's any reason to do them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can cap on that and try to get closer. I think we're you know, what, I mean, ideally, it'd be great for us to be able to start drafting a bill, but, yeah, so I mean, you're 2%, they're 3%, you know, 6% for the state. But we have a.
Well, I think it was, you know, what Doug was saying, if that one in the middle, you know, the 1.9 multiplier, and I brought it to 1.64 increase, that's less than the 2%, obviously less than the 3. If we, see that word, my.
Amortization.
And if we needed that other 1%, then we're at 2.64.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's something in there.
Assuming. Yes. Trouble.
Well, that the 1% is the withdrawal liability that I'm talking about, that if we stretched it out, maybe it would only be 1% right now. And then we're at 2.64 to get the 1.9, the 60, and the 1.75 COLA. And then like everybody, I don't have a problem whether it's 50 or 55 for early retirement, as long as, you know, 55-year-old isn't penalized because we have 50. Straight actuary.
And then I would just point out that there are going to be differences between MSRS and PARA just because of the employee and employer contribution. So we're going to have to figure that out. That's, I mean, they're going to have two separate deals. This will be something to be discussed with the employers to maybe get closer to like the PARA employers are contributing to their folks for the same job duty, but obviously we don't know how that's gonna go. I see all of them.
Well, you know, we had to take a $45 million cut this year, so this is really a very hard bill for us to swallow in that space, right? And I just, you know, somebody said that we're looking at that increase that's coming for paid medical leave coming in 2026. In addition to that, I'm expected to cut additional amounts in next fiscal year above and beyond that 45. So this is really challenging for our agency.
Certainly, improvement in retention, having two different groups of people that are treated differently, right? I went through it.
Absolutely.
MSRS state patrol plan versus PNF plan, 3.6% higher contribution for at the end of the career, relatively the same benefit with some exceptions, but I think we have to accept there are going to be differences between PNF and MSRS, and I'm going to work again. I'm not going to adversely affect something put together that's accepted by PNF because of differences with MSRS. I'm not going to let perfect again get in the way of good. If we can get something for our folks, particularly, I need reference to state patrol dispatchers. If we can get something that maybe isn't identical but better than what they have now, then again, simplistically, I look at it as a step forward in the right direction. Hopefully down the road something can improve, and I recognize, of course, DOC budgetarily is probably in a different situation than DPS. So, and again, I can't speak for DPS. I haven't spoken to anybody at DPS. Do they have the ability to absorb a higher employer contribution than DOC? I don't know, but perhaps that's where a sub plan within the plan would come in.
And I certainly brought that forward, considering that we look at, just the whole demographic of these two groups is so very different, right? We have three ranges. They work pretty much their entire career doing that. And we know that telecommunicating is really hard work, and that, folks burn out super quickly in that space. Not to say that probation officers, corrections agents aren't hard, but the demographics are very different. So they are distinct in that measure.
Back to you, but if there is no employer cost addition, you don't have an objection to a plan.
We're open to. But that would be like my perfect trade. If I say, well, this, and I mean, I do believe that at some point this will cost us more, right? It is the reality of the situation, knowing, we have we know that when those increases come or some sort of modification to the benefits or something doesn't go great in the markets, that it's often the employer that will pay. We're okay in that space.
I have to imagine it's also a chance to think TLC. Maybe a really strong plan, because sometimes you may want to say, oh, if I do this number over here, I have the ability to get this into a benefit. I know a lot of people call me in particular from various parts of the state, including DLC, because they're a contractor, asking questions. Because this would be a benefit. So, I know the DLC got a lot of challenges with their budget, clothing facilities. Definitely familiar with what's going on in Stillwater right now. There's other things going on, but I have to be a benefit for those employees. MCE represents some of the questions. It's just a benefit. We want to make sure that they can take some.
Any other questions or comments? And then I want to make sure that staff have time to make sure that their questions are answered in the event that they want to do some drafting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So next time, I would just note, to move in just a little bit here on the agenda. One thing that we are going to ask the group here to do is to help with drafting a report. And we can draft a bill. That'll definitely take us enough time. I think the last bill we did for a work group was 18 pages. We were talking about a couple of different iterations here. So if you can go through the list that we have provided as a link, document to the agenda, and see if there's anything we can to draft. You don't have to share it with the rest of the world, just send it to us. Alina has volunteered to take all the drafts and incorporate them into a work report, which we will have to produce and send over to the commission along with their bill. So there is a list that I think we call it a sign tab. So if you can look at that, that'd be really great. Para will have definitely some items, as well, MSRS, but we take a look at that. Anything you can grab there would be great. And then we did attach a status list of this thing that we needed to get through according to the session law. I think we've done it. I think we've been through everything, so I don't think we need to focus on that. But I think for next meeting, it's probably, I don't know if we have that much to talk about except for where you all come in terms of, you know, the 2% and the 3% and the 6%. Yeah, you probably need to report back where start back. And I think the employees or the positions, we're going to need to have that fine tuned as well, that regional director, whatever, regional manager.
So just for clarification, Susie, we'll still have the opportunity to provide input on what your kind of proposal is for legislation, and we'll have a conversation the next time around past service, continued conversations around past service, withdrawal, and the definitions, because I think there's multiple groups that have work to do on the definitions, including probation on the public employer county side too.
Oh, because there's still some issue on the definition of probation.
Yeah, we just did MSRS. That was MSRS.
Not on the county side.
Yeah, we have para.
Fair definitions are okay on that, I think. Yeah, we did those.
We talked about it at the last meeting. I spoke, sorry, and I spoke with Amy since then. I think we have a little bit more work to do, but I think the way we left the last meeting is these kind of, you know, I told the employers need to do a little bit more work to figure out if we were close and end up like what exactly. We're working through that. But that's where we left it at the last meeting.
Could you be prepared to talk about that at the November 16th?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's the same conversation that was being had today around the question of case and the intent around, is this direct supervision, the supervisors who are in this room? I think we've been clear, we want you, of course, included. There's also different traditional forms of structure of county employment that have deputy administrators, et cetera. How far afield does that go? I think we're still comforted by some of the proposed legislation on direct supervision. The other question is caseload. There's two, this is where Nicole and Tammy Jo and I had a conversation last Friday. There's two professions in general that you guys are really wanting to make sure that are in there, the case file, the folks who are putting together the written reports. What's the acronym, Emilio?
PSI writers.
PSI writers, and as well as trainers. And I do think that there are differences from our perspectives on both of those. Was legislators thinking when they were being sold information early retirement plan? I do not think they were thinking about those two work groups. And I think that the question about how much of direct supervision role for those frontline staff is one that we still want to have. Is a 50% as a casework threshold? We don't see why not. You can't be a trainer and still maintain active probation caseload. Those are conversations. We thought that the most important thing that we were doing today was this, because this is the question of money, and is this going to be practical? Is there a vision going forward? I have a lot of hope that through today's conversations and what we're talking about, the green column, that there's movement there. I think we can get to a agreed upon definitions too.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing here is that we're running on it. So have those conversations November 4th or 6th, whenever the next meeting is. I think we need to have this stuff resolved. And then, you know, please take on an assignment. If that's how we get that done next meeting, that's fantastic, right? But then we will draft a bill. We will send them out. You all please review them as quickly as you can. There'll be a nightmare to get through. I can promise you that. But review them, send us your comments. We'll reincorporate them. And them out again. So that's what I'm thinking, but I think there are a few discussions still that you did. I don't know. We have time to still do them now, but.
I mean, past service is hanging like a cloud over all of us. I can't fathom that being a smaller conversation or a bigger conversation than the conversations around definitions. I feel like that is something that is significant.
Would it be okay to have a one bill that includes something about past service, one that doesn't?
I don't. We would certainly prefer at a minimum having the principals in there. We have real concerns about the whole group coming together with one proposal, saying this is the proposal, and not dealing at all with the past service piece that very much was part of the reason that we came here. I will also say for team probation, from a messaging perspective, if we don't have something to deal with the issue of past service, we have to go back to all of our folks and say, we're looking at almost an identical cost and none of that benefit being in here. And so that's part of why for us, it is something that continues to hang overhead, is we were looking at 5.4%, one of the plans, 5.5% in another plan, where we're including the full piece of past service. And I understand that our plan was perfect and that's why we're here, but that's something that we're grappling with as chief probation and why the past service piece is really important to us.
The bill cannot have. We don't do that. No, I can't do that. You guys can put it in your testimony for sure, but we have to have like real stuff. Like we draft something that says you'll get $1 million of credit or $1 million out of the trust fund, you know, for up to 10 years of service or whatever it may be. I mean, that's the draft. So it's really what you guys all want to do in terms of the details. The principles can be part of the report for sure. Right? That would be great. Tanya?
If I could just have definition. It sounds like we're starting to have a conversation about pre-education. And post. Talking about PSI writers and who's doing the ranks. That's a very challenging conversation to have, because if we're just talking about people that are actually going in the field, these folks still deal with the same information. And so I was wondering, be mindful of that, because we're looking ahead a bit, about 350 agents are looking at those who do PSI writing, doing pre-adjudication, significant percentage of the total number that we have. Because getting traditional high risk, there's 200 agents. It just one area. And so I just think you really mindful of what we're talking about for the definition. I think it's the same information, the same folks. However, they do show up at their job, whether they're in the field running up and down, if they're doing this A, B, and C over here, it's the same information, same folks, same processing of. So I was really mindful. But I just don't want this excluding significant numbers of people. Our PSI unit is huge. And they're all career agents and stuff. So it's kind of put it out
there. So Matt's heard this story, but I stand by the fact that when I look at my small shop, I have a PSI writer. I do. He has been an agent for 26 years. He writes PSIs now. Before that, he had more of an active caseload. What does it mean to write a PSI? He goes to the jail. He meets with the person face to face. He interviews victims. He is gathering information. And then he's a transfer agent as well. So he might have to go to a home to verify a residence, but he's a report writer. He is in the field as much as a detective who is investigating something and writing a report. And we don't move that detective out of the police plan because, well, he's spending his day writing reports. And so that's where I struggle, is I think that there is a misconception that there are people that simply sit and write a report and never speak to a criminal and never speak to a victim. And they don't have victims calling them, crying, demanding things. They read victim impact statements and they write that into the report. And then afterwards, when that person is sentenced, they're the one testifying to their report in court with the person. They're then meeting them afterwards, signing documents one-on-one. This isn't a person who's locked up in an office doing nothing and not having any contact with offenders. It is someone who is having almost daily contact with offenders. And so I think that that's a misconception of that this is just the person who is writing up a report. It's different.
into the code book. The PSI writer had it as a client for 6 weeks. So they're moving the client for 6 weeks. So the minimum for a PSI to be with one person before it was not to be with
You know, and then I think the the larger the county, the more specialization you're gonna see, the more numbers of positions. So in Ramsey County, you know, like probably Hennepin, whereas Nicole has the one assigned to that, and Ramsey County, we're gonna have many more of that. In fact, we have ones that are assigned just to do straight domestic pre-sentence investigation. So their head is in that caustic material the entire day, interactions. And then, of course, if you're getting an investigation, you don't do investigations, you know, lower level offenses don't usually get an investigation. So if you're getting a pre-sentence investigation or a juvenile probation officer report, we call it, and our juvenile, the same thing. Got a few doing that. So you're in serious cases in your head and your interactions and stuff. So and then the other thing is we kind of talked about in this whole process, the need to have like staff, it'd be desirable to advance to get supervisors so that you draw good people. It's the same thing. I have a coworker who's leaving this week to switch over to doing PSIs, and people will move back and forth amongst these positions. And that's part of what helps the person maybe survive over a career is they go into different, they might do, you know, working with, you know, this severe type of ISR and stuff, and they might do PSIs for all them. So I get concerned if we start trying to edge off some of those things, you're not going to get people who are qualified to do those kinds of positions. And you need that. You desperately need people to do something, take all the experience of running around all over the east side of St. Paul for 10 years, now be court focused, use all that experience and make tough judgment calls in your PSI report, in your court hearing. And so I think there's lots of reasons why we would want to protect that ability to move around. And that's part of what keeps people, you know, able to tolerate caustic material is they've got to be able to, you've got to allow that flexibility so that they can contribute where they can contribute, use their experience, and also get away from one intensive type of work for a different intensive type of work. To help.
So does that give you something to work with for the next meeting? Sounds like you can put back with something for consideration by the group.
And I actually agree with the principle that Susan was saying too, like, or someone focused of separating the two. If we can talk about past service being purchasable, but how you do that, whether it's just, I mean, the original bill, what the new plan is, has past service be purchasable, you can do it. But then there's a secondary bill with your principles and the ask for some kind of creative solution on the state contributing to make those rates smaller. I feel like having those two vehicles be separate allows the original focus to be on the work that we came, the miles of work we've done to get towards a plan to allow that hold the spotlight. So that would be my suggestion.
I have great concerns about the past service. I do. I mean, because I get what everybody's saying, it did one big funded, how do we expect money to fall from the sky? And I get what you guys are saying, writing, passionate fight that, you know, I want to fight too, but I just don't see where this money is coming from. I don't think somebody would want to take the deferred comp and throw it into the pension. Why somebody would do that? And to that end, I really think, you know, in these final elements, we need to have our explanation packaged, you know, so if people are going to live in these two worlds, in the para general coordinated fund, and then now in this new one to explain the nuances of that. Because I think, Nicole, you understand it. If you go at 60, then you got to take the other one at a similar age and you're going to take a hit on that money. So I think we really have to explain that, just like in 2 years, they're going to have to take a vote on Social Security and explain to them, God, no, don't do that. So I think, and I don't know if that's in your write-up part. I don't, is it in there that we would do this piece, or is that additional?
We could write it. We haven't written anything, and I'm hoping you guys will help with that. So we could run a telecommunicator bill, a probation bill, if you're concerned about having that service.
But Karen doesn't want to, right?
You know, so it would be fun Everything will be the same except they'll have certain stuff, you will not. You'll have the opportunity to buy all of it. No problem there, right? Because it's no state money. So you'd have one bill, telecommunicators, you buy it, but you can't get state money for it, once there is. Your bill then would be probation and have something relating to the state will establish the trust. And you put in X number of dollars, and then there would be some way to allocate that for people to buy that service.
I don't know, yeah, I mean, we'd have to look at all of the different options. We'd also like to learn more about what this mixed service approach would look like and what it could be. Because that's something that I think could be put on the table that we could discuss further and learn more about. One of the things I was gonna suggest is, I mean, and we can keep having our discussions as we go here now as well, but I just wanted to throw it out there. As we're talking about our next meeting, this time went really, really fast, even though we were here at noon. Maybe our next meeting, we do the same thing, not be 1 to 3.
I will not be here for the next meeting and my co-chair is not here right now. So, I mean, I tend to think that 3 hours is about the attention span that people have, but if the
Better than
consensus
2.
wants to go maybe 1.
But we're on such a tight time schedule, it just, I don't know if 1 to 3 is gonna get us where we need to be the next meeting. So I'm just proposing that we have a longer meeting again.
We do have 2 more scheduled. So, I would defer to staff.
So we just need decisions by next.
Okay.
I mean, we need to, there's a lot on the table here,
Okay.
so.
So do you want to go noon to 4?
I guess more, can the work group go noon to 4? If the general consensus is sure, then we check with Scott to confirm if he's our chair.
Start on the proposal of the 2 plans, with one with S service and one.
So let's focus on this meeting thing first.
Yeah.
You all want to do noon to 4? Is that?
What day again?
Oh, noon to 6, noon to 3? Noon to 3.
Oh, you said 3, I mean.
What are you doing here?
I will be here. So I would defer to you. I think
So do you want to not have your lunch break, or do you want to go, 1 to 4 or noon to 3?
Noon to 3.
Noon to 3.
Commuters prefer to get out of here as quick as we can.
Okay.
We'll talk to Scott and see if that works. I think it was our next meeting, on the 6th. Okay, sorry.
And to your question, I don't know if we can answer that today. I think we're all, that's part of,
I don't
think our.
I don't know if I can answer that question.
Okay.
If there's gonna be, I'm not sure I understand this group supporting, would we be asked to support 2 separate proposals for past service, which doesn't seem to make sense to me, right? And so if I'm gonna be, I just want to understand what I would be asked to support or not. But just 2 different proposals for past service seems odd.
So for me, if I could answer that, I'm sorry, I just agreed, but for me, what I see to what Dar is saying is she doesn't want it to sink us where we're saying we want past service. But what if the language is we want the ability to purchase past service, or if funding becomes available to support that?
Funding bill should be separate. The purchasing credit, I think we would be in agreement of leave that in there. But the funding should be a separate mechanism in a separate bill.
But doesn't the bill have to, the original one say that if it's available?
No, you could have a completely separate mechanism of funding that's available to people when they're purchasing their service credits that they would be able to rely on.
What's the viability of a bill like that when?
I think that gets back to the existential question of what you have, and you have lobbyists that represent you too, of what's the viability of getting legislative funding in this environment for past service credit.
Right.
And that's a tough question, but I completely agree. If we've gone all this way, and the tenant, I mean, it's going to be a tough conversation. Dave knows this, and our board. We are passing 9, 10, 12% levy increases right now. And they absolutely do see, our employers see this as we get, unlike the state right now, we're not keeping our promise 6.5. We are going up to 7.5. And so I still feel very strongly and committed to what the work group has done. And we will be presenting it with a recommendation if we can get there of let's support this. But I do think this past service thing will be something that clouds us unnecessarily. It's not a fight that we necessarily want to stand in your way on. And that's why I would suggest keeping it separate from whatever plan we have. Make purchasing credits available, figure out the mechanism of what you guys want and how you want to approach it to be separate would be my suggestion.
But you'd have the ability to purchase in the original bill.
So I know that talking to our members, that is one of the most important things in this conversation. If we couldn't get the first time, they want the bill to purchase. Whatever that looks like, they want to see what the numbers look like. You know, people have been doing this 30+ years, or just shy of that rule of 90. We have 80s have been there 40 years. They want the conversation. They want to see what it's. So if it's separate, whatever it is, they want to see what the past purchasing looks like.
I guess between now and then, we should put a bill that shows you how this could be done, I think. I won't have all the details, they're not all here, but we did.
As an example, you're saying?
Right, that's all about, just.
And people keep saying it's $700,000 to purchase past credit. That's all your past credit. If you go back on the chart and you only purchase 5 years or
Right.
2 years, just to start that age 60 plan, then that's different. It's less than that.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is under the assumption that we're gonna get 30 years. Nobody's, nobody knows.
Amy, when you're doing this, can you add it that the employer is certifying the years of service as a probation officer or a 911 telecommunicator for the purchase of past service? Like, we have no ability to go back and look and see if the entirety of your 20 years, 30 years is as whatever. So I need an employer cert that says it is.
That's reasonable.
Just before we wrap up, I want to make sure, I'm hoping that maybe, Alina, you could send out a follow-up email from this meeting with those links so that people can start populating the documents. I know they're in the agenda, but if they're right in the top of the inbox, they might get a little more activity with instructions so that everyone understands what we're supposed to do. Yeah, homework email.
This is a work group.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that.
Is there anything else right now that we know that you need staff?
Somebody brought up the combined versus mixed service. I think that I know what that means, but is it possible for us to get it?
Yeah, we did a presentation on it.
When it's in the materials?
It's in the materials, but highlight of past service or your combined service versus mixed service. Combined service uses your high five, your multiplier, and your years of service. The highest high five applies to each benefit. If you're required by CSA law, which again governs all funds, to take the benefits within 1 year of each other. Which means that like we have a lot of people who have general plan service and are in the P&F plan. And so when they retire at 55, their P&F at 5 goes to the general plan. Their benefit has a factor of riders reduced accordingly, and they get 2 benefits from each of the plans, right? Mixed service is when you can defer that general plan benefit until age 66. So you can't take it at the same time without a reduction, right? It's just allowing you to defer when you take the general plan benefit.
So you can take a reduction.
You get that high five. The high five is applied, but it's not, you can't take both at the same time and not have the reduction apply. So I don't want members to think that it's a way of getting more at the same time.
Right, so I couldn't go at 60 and then at 62 take my,
You'd still have a reduction applied to your general.
but it'd be less.
Yes, it's whenever you take your general plan benefit is when what reduction, what factor would occur. So if you take it 62, you're gonna have a reduction. You take it at 66, you're not going to. But you can't like take it at 60 and not have a reduction.
I thought that was an option to us already.
If you have CSA that requires you to take it within a year of each other. So what you could do under this new plan is you could take it at like, let's say you're close to 61 when you retire in the new plan, and then you can push it to like 62, right? You just have to use CSA.
But the other thing that is something to be aware of, particularly for the people who have more service and are already in their high five, there is coverage by more than one fund, which already exists for all the plans. Then that allows you to defer your benefit to whenever it's just your high five is not applying to the, like, whatever high five is in the plans applies to it, and you don't have to take it at the same time. So there is that option that already exists for you to do that, and if you're already in your high five, there's very little. What was that called? Coverage by more than one fund. Thank you.
Coverage by what?
Coverage by more than one
By
fund.
more than one fund?
That's the one you could. Like in my head, this is what I live with. So you got CSA coverage by more.
Got it. All right.
All right, thank you. With that, just a reminder, then the next meeting will be on Thursday, November 6th, beginning at noon. And wrapping up around. Okay, very good. Thanks for today and we are.